Hogwarts Blood Wizard Chapter 1, Sorting Ceremony. Susan Pence, Hufflepuff. Justin Finley, Hufflepuff. In the large and beautifully decorated exhibition hall, a wrinkled hat with a big mouth that splits from the edge, twisting restlessly while singing, and occasionally being squeezed by a few undaunted little wizards. The brim of the hat gave out bursts of weird laughter. As the names of the students and the colleges assigned to them were spoken from the sorting cap, the little wizards clapped their hands warmly or perfunctorily on the seats below. At least in this orientation party, even Gryffindor and Slytherin, who are displeased with each other, will maintain this relatively harmonious scene. The little wizards waiting for the distribution academy in the audience were nervous or expectant, watching other people put on the sorting hat, and then walk to the corresponding academy seat in the funny tone of the hat. However, among the new students, there is a thin boy who is out of place. He is looking blankly at the gorgeous and retro decorations and candles suspended in mid-air. The bright lights of the hall are illuminating the auditorium. It was bright, and translucent ghosts could be seen flying through the air all around. Everything made the boy a little bit adaptable for a while, and it took a long time before he muttered to himself. Who am I? Where am I? What am I doing? Strange, am I dying in the hospital bed? Just as the boy felt familiar and unfamiliar with everything around him, a loud female voice resounded in the large exhibition hall. Yvonne Halls. Professor Minerva McGonagall stood at the four-corner table where the sorting cap was placed, looking at the parchment scroll in her hand, but waited for a long time and did not see the new students come up, so she frowned and said loudly again. Yvonne Halls. I haven't seen any movement in the freshmen for a long time, and now even Dumbledore cast a suspicious look, and the old students from the major colleges talked in private. Who's Yvonne? So courageous. It's not going the wrong way, you missed the sorting ceremony, right? This is interesting. At this time, the remaining freshmen, under the gaze of many professors and seniors, moved a few steps behind them. Only the boy with blonde hair and black pupils who had not figured out his condition remained standing still, looking very conspicuous. Mr. Yvonne Halls, please come to the stage here. Professor McGonagall repeated it again. Me? Yvonne pointed to himself in a dazed manner, and suddenly felt that this scene was a bit strange but unexpectedly familiar. Yes, please come up as soon as possible. Just like others have done, there are other children who need to be sorted out. Perhaps because Yvonne is a freshman, although Professor McGonagall spoke for the fourth time when I asked, I didn't mean to be angry at all, but I felt that the new student might be a little nervous. Before Yvonne could react, he felt that he was nudged slightly, and then the freshmen in the front row also unexpectedly pushed Yvonne onto the stage one by one with tacit understanding. Okay, kid, come over here soon. Professor McGonagall stepped forward, put Ivan's shoulders on the chair, and picked up the sorting hat and pressed it on Ivan's head. The sorting hat twisted his body restlessly on Ivan's head, and said strangely. Hey, boy, don't be too shy, you are not the first person to feel nervous in such a place. Trust me, it's over with closed eyes. It doesn't hurt at all. Yvonne rolled his eyes. After staying in the new place for a while, he also had some guesses about the current situation, but he still felt a little unbelievable. But, is this really Hogwarts? That magical place where magic is taught? But that's not. Yvonne couldn't help thinking about it, but the voice of the sorting hat rang in Ivan's ears. Yes. Of course, this is Hogwarts. You are not dreaming, I am 100% sure. I guess you must come from a Muggle family, right? Every few years, there are always a few new little wizards who don't believe that magic is real. They say it's all tricks and they want to get it out of my body. Here comes a rabbit with long ears, I told them there was nothing in the hat, but they didn't believe it. The sorting hat was making a silly joke, and the split mouth almost extended to the brim of the hat. The ability of the sorting hat to read memories made Yvonne not daring to think too much, so he quickly condensed his mind. But perhaps because of the influence of the sorting hat, Ivan's mind was like a slideshow, flashing through sections of strange memories. The scattered Yvonne couldn't piece it together. It seemed that a witch was teaching her own magic. The witch in my memory is about 30, with beautiful long blonde hair, and talking with her mouth open. Then Yvonne only felt a panic of fear hit her heart. The sorting hat is also the first time I have seen such a messy little wizard, but I am also surprised that Yvonne is not from a Muggle family. How can children from a wizard family not know Hogwarts? A cold sweat appeared on Ivan's forehead. Although the various thoughts and memories read by the sorting hat belonged to the original owner, he didn't know if this hat would read any important secrets. Fan can only try to force himself to think about something insignificant. Ahem. Seeing that the sorting hat seemed to have an endless posture, Professor McGonagall had to cough slightly to remind the sorting hat on the stage to do business quickly. The sorting hat stopped talking, and Yvonne was finally relieved, but he was also a little curious about which college he would be assigned to. Well, let me see, optimistic, smart and like crazy thinking. The sorting hat dragged a long tone, suddenly lowered his voice and said. And a little bit of black magic. I can black magic. Yvonne was confused and remembered the memory just now. Oh, yes, an ancient and rare, black magic. The Sorting Hat whispered and chatted with Yvonne, as if whispering something. Of course, in my opinion this is also an interesting black magic. Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com always allows people to see things they don't want to see. Someone has used it to prank, maybe you can do it too. Try. Although Dumbledore definitely doesn't want anyone to do it again. The Sorting Hat complained to himself. Where should I go? Slytherin. Yvonne was a little curious about how he could black magic, but the most important thing now was the issue of sorting. After dividing the courtyard, he can take off this hat that can read memories. In the 4 colleges of Hogwarts, entering Gryffindor requires enough bravery, or reckless. What Ravenclaw wants is wisdom or a desire for knowledge. Slytherin corresponds to a cunning and insidious character and outstanding magic talent. As for Hufflepuff, Yvonne feels that Hufflepuff Academy is usually responsible for accepting the remaining students. The Sorting Hat said that learning dark magic is very much in line with the standards of Slytherin College. Of course, it is also possible that he was assigned to Ravenclaw because of his optimism and intelligence. Yvonne thinks a little narcissistically. No, neither. The Sorting Hat's tone suddenly became humorous. Although it will make you a little sad to say that, Slytherin usually only chooses some talented little wizards, so. Gryffindor. The Sorting Hat changed the soft whisper when whispering with Yvonne, and the loud voice resounded throughout the hall. Gryffindor. Yvonne took the Sorting Hat off the top of his head, a little surprised, and even too late to complain about the Sorting Hat's evaluation of his talent. Yes, you should go there. The Sorting Hat proudly said. I have never missed it, you have the corresponding quality. Chapter 2, Academy Legend. Yvonne was still ready to ask again. The cheerful applause from the audience had already sounded. Yvonne had to press down on his stomach full of questions, put the Sorting Hat on the 4-corner table, and walk down the steps. Seeing Yvonne coming down, several senior students moved aside in Gryffindor's seat to make room. A pair of twin brothers with the same appearance and fiery red hair pressed Yvonne to the space in the middle, and one of them spoke with an exaggerated tone. Gosh, I bet you dare not give Professor McGonagall face so much in the freshman sorting ceremony. You are definitely the first one. This is really... What is it really? Yvonne asked in confusion. It's so brave. The other of the twin brothers took the conversation. You are destined to become a legend in the academy. The two looked at each other and said in unison. Hearing the answers from the two, Yvonne almost didn't pick it up in one breath. The brain circuits of the two brothers were so strange that he couldn't understand it. Well, thank you. Yvonne politely thanked the twin brothers for their blessing, and then asked. My name is Yvonne Halls, how about you? I'm George Weasley, and that's Fred over there, one of the twin brothers spoke first, blinking at Yvonne. You'd better remember, don't admit your mistakes next time you meet, Fred hates people calling him wrong. Okay, George, I don't think I will admit that I am wrong. Yvonne is clear about the trick of the two brothers swapping identities, naturally he will not be fooled, and turned to the other of the twin brothers. Are you right, Fred? Fred, who was thinking about playing with his brother as a newbie, was stunned, and George, who had spoken to Yvonne before, was also taken aback for a while before asking. Wait, how do you know I am George's? This is easy to guess, isn't it? Who in the freshmen doesn't know that your Weasley brothers like pranks? Of course, Yvonne couldn't say that he saw it from a book, but could only make a temporary excuse to fool it. Gosh, are we so famous already? Even the freshmen know it. George and Fred said in surprise, feeling that so many years of fighting against the Hogwarts school rules finally came to fruition. Puff Ron, who was feasting and eating, almost squirted out the food in his mouth. When did his two brothers become so famous among the freshmen at Hogwarts? Why doesn't he know? George and Fred were a little curious that Yvonne whispered to the Sorting Hat on stage. It was the first time they saw someone chatting with that hat for so long. Yvonne fooled the past half-truth, after all, knowing black magic in Gryffindor Academy is not something to show off. By the way, Yvonne took the opportunity to turn the topic to George and Fred's adventure career at Hogwarts School, and inquired about the location and information of the secret passages in Hogwarts. Yvonne, who has read the original, naturally knows that George and Fred have a magic map that can show most of the hidden passages of Hogwarts and mark the names of people inside. With it, you can travel freely in this magic castle without worrying about being discovered by professors and administrators. Although Yvonne has read the original in his previous life and knows many secrets of Hogwarts, after all, he can't remember it. This map is still very useful. And the Weasley brothers, facing Yvonne, who is like a little fan, naturally revealed a lot of information unguardedly, and even wanted to win Yvonne into the great cause of pranks. However, there is no disclosure about the magic map. Yvonne was not surprised. After all, it was the first time I met. No matter how good the conversation, it is impossible to reveal such an important secret. Ivan just wants to gain some good impressions to pave the way for the future. But at this moment, an inexplicable voice suddenly rang in Ivan's mind. Ding, the host gets secret information, the task is being generated. Mission objective, explore Hogwarts. Current progress, 2/100. Task introduction, the curiosity to explore the unknown is something every little wizard should possess. The 1,000-year-old castle contains countless secrets. Please explore and understand them. When the exploration progress reaches a certain level, it will be given a certain level based on performance. Rewards. Ivan, who received the news suddenly, couldn't help being stunned, and the conversation with the Weasley brothers was also interrupted. Goldfinger? Ivan quickly reacted, followed by ecstasy. I traveled to Hogwarts inexplicably before. Although Ivan had the joy and fortunate to live again, but there was also a sense of anxiety about suddenly arriving in an unfamiliar environment, just because I had to pretend to be forced down by Ivan. But now I feel much more relieved. Ivan casually dismissed the Weasley brothers who were still about to continue talking about their adventures. He sank his heart and focused his attention on groping for this newly emerged golden finger. After the method, a series of information finally appeared before Ivan's eyes. Ivan Halls. Occupation, Wizard. Magic Bar, Fear Curse Level 1, 3/200. Knowledge Theory, Magic Item Making Level 0, 435/500. Magic Items. Magic Wand, Wood, Unicorn Hair, 11 inches and 3/4 long. Magic, Medium. Fit, 72.5%. Academic points, none. The information column that appeared in front of me was as expected by Ivan, reading www.ugonshu. The com is only part of the content in the information column, which is a bit beyond Ivan's expectations. Fear Curse? Magic Item Production. Ivan slowly muttered to himself. As a little wizard who has just crossed over and hasn't even fully figured out the situation, he will naturally not bring these two abilities. Thinking of the memory that had appeared in his mind when he was on stage just now, Ivan suddenly understood that he should be in possession of it. This little wizard named Ivan Halls had learned magic before entering school. This situation is not uncommon among little wizards. It is important to know that even Hermione Granger, who was born in a Muggle family, can master some simple magic through self-study before entering school, let alone those who were born in the little wizard of the wizard family. But the magic of fear, Ivan thought for a long time but had no impression, it seemed that it was not the magic that appeared in the original book. Ivan is not surprised, after all, Harry Potter is just a novel, and it is only a corner of the magic world. It is impossible to show all the magic in every aspect, and the black magic in the original text is even rarer. A real black wizard can't only have so few black magic. After all, just the restricted book zone of Hogwarts, I don't know how many black magic books there are. Of course, what Ivan is more curious or worried about is the family situation of the original owner. A family that can teach their children dark magic before school is obviously not good. Ivan is very worried about his safety. If someone finds out that Ivan Halls, a little wizard, is occupied by a soul from another world, God knows what kind of dark magic is waiting for him. Chapter 3, Broken Memory. A piercing heart to meet? Still burned to death with fierce fire? Ivan couldn't help but shudder thinking about the tragic experience that might happen, trying hard to retrieve the memory of the original body. Didn't know if it was because of the crossing, these memories seemed to be shattered and hidden in the depths, letting Ivan want to break his head was nothing. Damn it, if only I could remember more memories. Ivan muttered to himself with a headache. It seems that before the end of the semester, he must learn to contemplate the mind, and then find a way to use the meditation basin in the principal's office to sort it out. Memory, otherwise it is very likely to wear help. In other words, Ivan doesn't even know where his home is now. There is no one who can mix with him. Harry Potter. Just as Ivan's head was thinking about how to get into the forbidden book area and learn to take the mind, Professor McGonagall's high voice drew Ivan's attention back to the sorting ceremony. It's not just Ivan. At this moment, all the little wizards and professors turned their eyes to the stage, like a repeat of Ivan when he took the stage, but obviously Ivan's little speciality is naturally incomparable with the prestige of the savior. As a thin and cramped little wizard with glasses came onto the stage, there was a warm applause from below, and the second-year Gryffindors next to Ivan were all red with their palms, staring fiercely. Looking at the forehead that was covered by a little hair, he seemed to expect to see the lightning-like scar. Harry Potter? Is she talking about Harry Potter? My mother said he defeated the mysterious man when he was born. I wish he could be assigned to Gryffindor. Ivan also followed the crowd applauded to welcome, otherwise it would be too maverick in this seat. Of course, Ivan also thinks this is the glory that Harry deserves. After all, Harry's miserable life of being bullied in childhood stems from the death of his parents. Had it not been for the protection magic that Lily Potter launched at the expense of her life that caused the mighty Voldemort to lose his power, the magic world would not know how many people would die. When they heard that Harry Potter was about to enter Gryffindor, the little wizards in the seats were even more mad. The Weasley twins hugged each other in excitement and shouted, "Potter! We have Potter!" The applause from Slytherin was much lighter. Especially the Slytherin chief, who was leaning on the front row. After hearing the Sorting Hat say that Harry had refused to enter Slytherin, his complexion was a bit unpleasant. Yvonne silently saw everything in his eyes, and the corners of his mouth chuckled, knowing that it was because Harry's savior's aura was still there. After a while, everyone discovered that apart from the title, Harry Potter also, when I was just an ordinary little wizard, I'm afraid I wouldn't care so much. Yvonne murmured in his heart, but raised his eyes and glanced at Dumbledore, who was looking at Harry with a smile, and suddenly felt that the prefect Slytherin's concern was right. After all, the principal helped the savior to open up, and the others didn't say anything. At least the College Cup Slytherin these semesters is not to think about. Seeing Harry walking down the stage, Gryffindor's prefect Percy Weasley could not wait to shake hands with Harry almost the moment Harry stepped off the stage. Most people have also vacated their positions next to each other one after another, seemingly wishing to have a good chat with the savior. Even George and Fred ran to join in the fun, and Ivan's side suddenly became empty. Yvonne didn't mean to join in the fun. He was enjoying the big meal in front of him without regard to his own. They all said that the food of the Rotten Country was authentic black cuisine, but the food at Hogwarts was unexpectedly good. Yvonne thinks this may be related to the Hogwarts food is house elves, rather than British wizards. Vaguely, Yvonne seemed to feel someone staring at him, and when he looked up, he saw Dumbledore staring at him with his bright silver eyes. Yvonne didn't have the slightest stage fright, and after smiling at Dumbledore pretending to be well-behaved and shy, he put a large piece of cake into his mouth in one bite, and swallowed it in threes or twos. Maybe it's because Yvonne is full of food, or Dumbledore was just on a whim. After smiling back, the greatest white wizard turned his gaze to other places. After the sorting ceremony was over, there was still plenty of time for the little wizards to eat. Yvonne ate enough to no longer hold it, and Dumbledore waved his wand to remove the leftovers. The food filled with food disappeared without a trace, just as it suddenly appeared before. The magic of magic, for the upper-grade little wizard who has seen it many times, has long been familiar, but for Yvonne, who has really experienced magic for the first time, it is still very new. Dumbledore stood up slowly at this time, reading www.theeyesofyuyuganshu.com also focused on the stage following Dumbledore's actions. Since we are all fed and drunk, let me say a few more words. I am going to post a few announcements of the school start now. Dumbledore's voice echoed in the hall, his eyes swept over the new students standing under the stage, and then he looked at Brother Weasley. New students should pay special attention, the woods on the playground are strictly prohibited for students to enter. I think this point should also be kept in mind by senior students. Our administrator, Mr. Filch, wants me to remind you that you are not allowed to use magic in the hallway between classes. The Quidditch player test will be conducted in the second week. After briefly emphasizing the rules that exist in each semester, Dumbledore paused briefly and raised his tone again. Finally, I must warn you that people who do not want to die tragically should not go to the third-floor corridor on the right within this year. Yvonne couldn't help but complain about Dumbledore's fishing remarks after listening. Guang said how dangerous it was, but didn't reveal other news, or even why you couldn't go there, with a mysterious look. How could this make some little wizards who are full of curiosity bear it? Sure enough, Dumbledore's stern warning didn't seem to have had its due effect. A few freshmen even laughed indifferently, but the senior students showed serious expressions. Of course, this does not include the two Weasley brothers with serious faces. The two are discussing something secretly. Yvonne guessed that they might go to the corridor that could make people tragic to take a look. It's just that Yvonne felt that before that, Dumbledore would talk to them in person in advance, or let Administrator Filch focus on them. Lest they do something. Chapter 4, Hello Hogwarts. After emphasizing the precautions for this semester, Dumbledore seemed to have become the kind of a little incongruous headmaster, wearing a slightly crooked wizard hat on his head, and said loudly, "Before going to bed, let us sing the school song together." As Dumbledore's voice fell, Yvonne clearly saw the faces of the professors on the stage changed, and several senior students were also constipated. And Dumbledore was waving his wand on his own, and a long golden ribbon floated out of the wand, turning into words like a snake. The wand is like a baton. Under the guidance of Dumbledore, the Hogwarts school song sung by the whole school resounded in the hall. Hogwarts, 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 please teach us, whether it is old or bald, or a young man with idiotic legs, our heads can be filled with novelty something interesting. Various versions and various tunes were put together in a jumbled manner, and the Weasley brothers, who tried to mislead everyone in the mix, Yvonne also sang a few words along with them. After singing, I unexpectedly felt that this was mixed the tone. It seems pretty good. Yvonne couldn't help but wondered if there was a problem with his music aesthetic. Fortunately, there is also the Principal Dumbledore who has the same feeling. The respected white wizard was moved to tears under the influence of music. It took a long time to break free from the melody. He wiped his tears while reminding all levels. Long can go back. Yvonne followed Gryffindor's freshman flow along the spiral staircase to the highest floor. At the end of the corridor, Percy stopped on a wall with a portrait of a fat woman. Before the new students could ask, everyone saw the fat woman move, changed her posture, and said solemnly, "What is the password?" "Dragon scum," Percy replied. The fat woman nodded, stepped aside, revealing a round hole in the wall, and Yvonne knew that this was Gryffindor's common room inside. After entered, Yvonne realized that this place was much bigger than he thought. The red lion flag representing Gryffindor is hung in the air. There are several long tables neatly placed in the wide lounge. Under the long tables are comfortable chairs. The dark brown fireplace is against the left wall. The burning flame illuminates the cold at the same time. Gryffindor's bedroom is for 5 people. There are 5 4-poster beds in the spacious room. Underneath are their respective luggage, neatly stacked aside. As there is no corresponding memory, Yvonne can't even recognize his suitcase and bed. Just as Yvonne was waiting for his roommate to choose a bed first, a grey-white owl suddenly flew from the top of the railing on the west side to Ivan's shoulder, and pecked Ivan's face intimately. Macca. Yvonne was taken aback for a moment, and then he remembered the name for no apparent reason. "Cuckoo," the grey-white owl replied. "Whether it is or not, I will call you Macca from now on." Yvonne stretched out his hand and scratched the owl's neck. Macca narrowed his eyes comfortably. With Macca's guidance, Yvonne quickly confirmed that the bed on the west side against the wall was his own. There were very few things around, except for bedding and pillows, but some clothes, daily necessities, and a few books to bring. The textbook. It is worth mentioning that Yvonne found a small sign next to his bed with the words Yvonne Halls intimately engraved on it. Other beds also have similar brands, but Yvonne didn't notice it just now. Not long after Yvonne stayed alone in the dormitory, there was a sound of pushing the door outside, followed by a slightly familiar voice. Unexpectedly, the sorting house is just wearing a hat. "I thought I was going to fight against the giant monsters. I knew I shouldn't believe George's nonsense." Pushing through the door was a little wizard with fiery red hair and freckles on the bridge of his nose. His mouth was babbling and talking, while the little boy behind him was wearing spectacles and looked a little thin. "Harry? Ron?" Yvonne was somewhat surprised. It was a coincidence that he was in the same bedroom as the savior Harry. "Hello, I am Yvonne Halls." Yvonne stepped forward and said hello. "Hey, this is Ron Weasley." Ron also noticed the existence of Yvonne. "Hello, this is Harry Potter." Harry also stretched out his hand at this time. Yvonne first shook hands with Harry, then looked at Ron and smiled. "Just now at the meeting, your brother George and Fred mentioned you to me." "Oh, damn, I don't believe they would say anything good about me." Ron thought about the way George and Fred play tricks on himself, and he was angry. Harry was a little pleased with Ivan's attitude different from other people. After all, since he entered the wizarding world, every time he encountered other wizards, he was either making a fuss or wanting to see the lightning scar on his head. I have to say that Harry thinks this behavior is really stupid. UU reading www.uucannonshoe.com. The friendship between the little wizards can sometimes be established in a short time. What's more, Yvonne, who has read the original book, knows the two of them, and deliberately caters to them, so naturally they quickly become friends. Harry talked about the unfair treatment he received before he came to the wizarding world in the dormitory, while Ron was talking about 1 or 2 funny things that were teased by the Weasley twins. Not long after, Neville and another little wizard who shared the same dormitory they also joined together, and they talked until late before going to bed and resting. The successive changes throughout the night made Yvonne really tired. Almost immediately after touching the bed, his body weakened and he couldn't get up again. Even the originally planned exploration system plan was forgotten. Vaguely, only the sound of Ron scrambling the mice could be heard. Yvonne raised his eyes and looked at it, then put the quilt over his head, and his lips moved silently. "Hello, Hogwarts." Early the next morning, Yvonne woke up from his dream and looked around blankly. It took him a long time to realize what was about to go to class. Suddenly he was about to be transferred from the hospital bed to the classroom, and for a while, Yvonne was still a little bit unable to adapt. However, in the first class at Hogwarts, Yvonne did not intend to be late. Although it was still early, Yvonne felt that he had set off earlier, considering the awkward stairs in Hogwarts. Great. Of course, before leaving, I didn't forget to call Ron and Harry who were still lying in bed. I don't know whether it was the influence of Harry's savior's halo or Ivan's bad luck. When he went downstairs, he encountered 2 steps that disappeared. Poor Ron even hit the wall disguised as a door. Fortunately, it was because of Ron's personal demonstration that Yvonne and Harry were spared. Chapter 5, Does this keep ordinary wizards from living? The three-person team finally stepped into the classroom before class. I bet. Those stares must be deliberately aimed at us, trying to make us late. Ron rubbed his still red nose, stepped into the classroom first, and glanced at the empty podium. It was a sigh of relief. It seems that we are not too late. The professor hasn't arrived yet. Harry also gave Yvonne a somewhat grateful look at this time. Fortunately, he got up early today, otherwise he would definitely be late. No, I think the professor has arrived. Yvonne ignored the words of the two, but glanced at the brindle cat on the podium, and then quickly returned to his seat. Harry and Ron were confused, but after they sat down, they saw the brindle cat on the podium suddenly jumped off the stage, distorted and deformed, and when they landed, they had become a middleman. The young witch is Professor McGonagall. Harry and Ron were stunned. They understood what Yvonne was talking about. They just didn't understand how Yvonne knew that Professor McGonagall changed the cat. Also surprised is Professor McGonagall. She used the form of Animagus to observe the situation of the little wizards in this class, and also to use the transformation of Animagus as this transformation technique. At the beginning of the class, I didn't expect to be recognized by a student. Chong Yifan nodded with a slight approval, and Professor McGonagall started the teaching content of the first transformation class. Before starting the class, I want to remind you that transfiguration is arguably one of the most complex and dangerous spells you will learn in Hogwarts School. Whoever wants to be in my class if you are mischievous, get out immediately and never come back. Professor McGonagall waved his staff and turned the podium in front of him into a pig. Amid the exclamation of many little wizards, he changed the podium back. Yvonne sat in the front position, seeing the whole process of transformation clearly. Accurate, fast, flawless. Being able to transform a wooden podium into a creature with consciousness is tantamount to directly changing the structure of matter, and even temporarily endowing the dead with intelligence. The mystery and power of magic are undoubtedly revealed at this moment. The magic of the wizarding world may be slightly inferior in destructive power, but it has its own uniqueness in other aspects, and it is comprehensive and complete. Professor McGonagall's demonstration immediately aroused the interest of the little wizards. After explaining the methods and techniques for the release of the transfiguration curse, he distributed a match to all the students. The goal was to turn the match into a silver needle. When Professor McGonagall started to explain the transfiguration curse, a reminder rang through Ivan's mind. Ding, you listened carefully to the professor's explanation, and found that the content was a bit obscure, and the proficiency of the transfiguration mantra was slightly improved. Yvonne called up the information bar and took a look, and there was an extra line of information in the magic bar. Transfiguration curse level 0, 6/100. Seeing that the content was as expected, Yvonne was a little delighted, which means that no matter what kind of magic it is, you only need to repeat the practice to increase your proficiency and you can quickly learn it. But after Yvonne repeated the practice for half a class, he realized that it seemed not as simple as he thought. Yvonne Halls. Mr. Halls. The stern and loud voice echoed in the closed classroom, attracting the attention of the little wizards in the front and rear rows. Professor McGonagall, who had not spoken until then, turned his head abruptly, and the little wizards turned their heads angrily, or waved their wands over and over again at the match in front of them in distress or entanglement, trying to make it happen even a little bit. The change. Professor McGonagall looked around for a week, and saw that the matches on the table of a little witch with tousled hair had changed significantly, with more or less the appearance of needles, and then loosened her tight lips, revealing a trace of satisfaction. Look. After warning the little wizards who were still fishing with his eyes, Professor McGonagall was able to turn his gaze to the stupefied boy in front of him, and said sternly. Mr. Halls, I think I should have reminded you before that the release of the spell is very dangerous, and you should stay focused before releasing the magic. In addition, repeating mechanical exercises does not provide much help. I think you should be more attentive, focused, and imagine what the silver needle looks like. Yes, Professor McGonagall, I will pay attention. Yvonne Halls nodded politely, condensed his mind under the witch's gaze, and the wand in his hand was nearly 12 inches high in the air with a strange frequency wave. On the black-grey wooden table, a match seemed to be driven by some kind of force out of thin air, twisted and deformed, slowly changing its shape under the action of magic. However, when the match was slowly deformed, it seemed to have been disturbed, and it changed back to its original state in an instant. This situation did not seem to be beyond what Professor McGonagall expected. After seeing this situation, he just nodded and left a sentence for more practice, then turned his head and left. After all, most of the little wizards who just started school are also like this. That's all. The disciples left Yvonne Halls muttering a low sigh. It seems that accumulating proficiency is not so easy. After trying most of the class, Yvonne has long lost the excitement he had before. Because the growth rate of proficiency has slowed down after the previous surge, and it is not possible to increase proficiency every time. After a period of exploration, Yvonne feels that this is not so much practice to increase the proficiency of skills, but rather to present his own level in the form of proficiency. After most of the class time, Yvonne couldn't even do a stable transformation spell for a long time. Just as Yvonne Halls was driving in a transfiguration class, he was suddenly poked a few times with his finger. Yvonne turned his head, only to realize that Harry, who was excited, was pointing at the two pointed, faintly shiny unidentified objects on the table in front of him and shouting loudly. "Hey, Yvonne! Look, I did it, I did it!" "Well, yes. Harry, you are amazing and talented." Yvonne glanced at the unknown objects on the table and nodded. The first class of transfiguration can make the matches change significantly. Fixed form for a long time, is already the upper level among the little wizards, at least, much more powerful than him. Right? I didn't expect that, my uncle, they are all muggles. Before entering school, I always wondered if I could release magic. Was affirmed by Yvonne, and Harry also gushed out his previous worries. Before entering the magical world, Harry was nothing more than an ordinary 11-year-old boy. He suddenly became the savior in the eyes of everyone. Although he received unimaginable attention and glory, he also accepted the difficulty. The pressure of imagination. Harry even thought about the embarrassing scene where he could not learn magic, but fortunately the situation has not changed so badly. Yvonne was not surprised by Harry's rapid learning of magic. After all, the Sorting Hat made it clear when he assigned the academy to be brave, kind, and extremely talented. The Sorting Hat even suggested that Harry go to Slytherin Academy. In the 3rd grade, he used the Guardian who had just learned it to destroy or drive away hundreds of Dementors. Had it not been for Hogwarts' free education to be overly happy, it is estimated that the talented savior before graduation would have the ability to be a professor at last. Regarding this, Yvonne said that he did not envy at all. There are only a few talented little wizards after all. Yvonne took a peek left and right and found that most of the little wizards were of this level. He sighed a little bit of relief. Without expecting it, I heard Professor McGonagall's high voice again. "Very well, Miss Granger. You can see, Miss Granger successfully transformed the mage into a silver needle. Gryffindor adds 5 points." In the aisle not a few steps away from Ivan's seat, Professor McGonagall was holding a silver needle aloft, and gestured to the little wizards around him. Miss Granger sitting upright, with grey and brown hair scattered randomly on her shoulders, proudly raising her small head, accepting the surprised or unexpected gazes of the little wizards around her. Yvonne stared at the silver needle blankly, and the mentality he had just adjusted exploded in an instant. Does this still allow ordinary wizards like them to live? Damn it, it's a bit worse. If I practice for a while, Professor McGonagall should praise me. Ron poked the table with his wand and stared at Hermione depressed. It seems to be annoyed with the glory that he was taken away. Yvonne glanced at Ron's table because he lost his magic power and turned back into an unknown object of matches again. He felt that Ron would not be able to reach Hermione's current level even after a few more lessons. Although he is not much better, he even said it was even worse. Yvonne sighed a little helplessly. What about the talent report after he said that after crossing? It is said that soul integration will lead to a substantial increase in mental power. The common routines in various novels did not show the slightest expression in Ivan's body. Only then can I understand how pertinent the Sorting Hat's evaluation of his talent is. Of course, transfiguration has been unable to stabilize. Yvonne guessed that in addition to talent, another part should be caused by the sharp drop in the wand fit caused by the soul replacement. If magic power is equal to electricity, and a magic wand is equivalent to a plug and wiring, then the spell is all kinds of electrical appliances. Nowadays, the wires have short-circuit problems from time to time, and the lights are naturally not working properly. However, Yvonne has not been able to solve the problem of the magic wand in a short time. I am afraid that this magic wand will be used for the last semester. After fighting with the match again for a while, the first class of transformation finally came to an end, and until the end, Yvonne did not stabilize the shape of the match after being deformed. On the contrary, I found a little trick that is not very useful, that is, after condensing the magic power through the magic wand in a disorderly manner, it can form a slender magic beam. The only function is to return the unstable transformation technique to its original shape. This was accidentally discovered by Yvonne when he almost exploded the match after he failed to release the transfiguration spell for the nth time. It was of no use other than to play tricks on Ron in the transfiguration class. Just as Professor McGonagall announced the end of Get Out of Class on stage, another voice resounded in Yvonne. Ding! After the host's unremitting efforts, the transformation teaching class is over, please continue to work hard. This comprehensive class evaluation, medium. Evaluator, Minerva McGonagall. Reward, academic points *5. Looking at the information that suddenly appeared in his mind, Yvonne had never thought of it before. Can I get rewards for class? Yvonne was a little surprised, especially when he saw the 3 words academic achievement point. He even complained about it. How could it be the same as when he was in college before? Apparently, it is evaluated by the professors of each subject. What about the final exam? If the exam is good or bad, there will be corresponding rewards and punishments, right? Of course, Tuko returns to Tuko. Ivan is still very happy to be able to discover a function of the system again, but I don't know what this grade point can be used for. After triggering the system panel, Ivan noticed the grade point. Maybe it's because I haven't gotten it before, and related functions have not been turned on. After this time, it didn't take long for Ivan to find the new redemption option in the panel. Ivan was slightly disappointed that there was only one solitary SWIBA experience card in the entire redemption column. The exchange required 100 academic points. The effect was to greatly improve the efficiency of learning within an hour. Ivan had never imagined to exchange powerful magic or forbidden curse before. Is this the rhythm of learning to the end? Ivan glanced at the 5 grade points that he had obtained after studying one class, and suddenly became a little desperate. Hogwarts was only 3 to 5 class hours a day. According to the 5-point grade point for each class, wouldn't it take 5 days of accumulation to redeem the 1-hour SWIBA experience card? This is too bad, right? What can you learn in 1 hour? But this is the end of the matter. Ivan has nothing to do with UU reading www.uugonshu.com. Apart from this exchange, Ivan has no other way to improve this inefficient learning efficiency. What else can I do? Study well. The transfiguration class is over, and the boring history of magic is next. Professor Binns, who teaches, is a stale ghost. The entire class is spent talking and teaching, ignoring the children. The situation of the wizards. This makes Ivan a little uncomfortable. The achievement of grade points is obviously related to the evaluation of his class by the professor, and the teaching method of the history of magic. Ivan does not even have the opportunity to improve the evaluation. After a whole class, Ivan once again received a middle evaluation and 5 grade points. But soon, Ivan understood the benefits of the magic history class. Because in the next magic spell class, I will learn how to apply magic power to the object smoothly and affect the object, which is the basis for learning the floating spell. Due to the interference of the magic wand, Ivan spent a whole lesson. It was a success. During the period, the props used to cast the spell were blown up 3 times. The grades are a little better than Neville. And the fastest Miss Granger, only released 3 times and achieved success. For this reason, Yifan got a bad review in the class evaluation without exception, and only 2 grade points. The only good news is that after a few days of wandering around, the progress of the Explore Hogwarts task in the task tree has reached 30%, with an average of 2 grade points for every additional percentage point. Got a total of 60 grade points, which is much faster than the reward for class every day. Also finally let Ivan see the hope of collecting 100 academic points and redeeming a SWIBA experience card. Chapter 6, Library. Ivan, when we finish eating, how about we go back to the dormitory to play the wizard flag? Ron, who had finished the last class on Wednesday afternoon, gnawed on chicken legs in the lounge and asked vaguely. Ivan. Ivan slowly put the last piece of cattle into his mouth, and after a little thought, he still shook his head and refused. No, I have to go to the library later. Let's play with Harry. Harry's chess moves are really stinky. They are not challenging at all. Ron shook his head disappointed first, and then as if he suddenly noticed Ivan's words, the chicken legs in his hand fell on the ground. My God! The library? I thought only one person would go there for the whole year. Hermione. Ivan thought for a while, and the little wizard who ran to the library every day should be our know-it-all lady only a few days after school started. Yet, who else is there except her? Ron said exaggeratedly. Harry on the side suddenly pulled Ron's shoulders. Ron realized that Hermione, who was holding a pile of books, was also in the lounge. He lowered his voice and said in front of everyone how much Hermione likes to preach and what a defiant person. Fortunately, perhaps because of the long distance, Hermione didn't move much, and probably didn't hear Ron's words. Harry also listened in place with an embarrassed look. He didn't like this kind of secretly speaking bad things, but the other little wizards were very interested. I have to say that Miss Granger became famous in the gossip circle of little wizards by virtue of her preaching temperament within a few days of the beginning of school. Ivan did not participate in the discussion of Hermione, but was not surprised by this situation either. After all, they are all 11 or 12-year-old little wizards. No one likes to be preached in person, especially the preaching is a little wizard of the same age. Ivan, what are you doing in the library? Harry asked curiously. Brothers are not fun anymore. Bah, are the brothers not fun enough? Or the wizard flag is not fun anymore? Although Ron didn't speak, it was obvious in his eyes. It's like an appointment with you guys who play games after school every day, and suddenly one day they say that they will go to the library to study hard after school. Ivan's mouth twitched. He didn't want to play the wizard flag. He just made some attempts to see if there were other ways to get grade points. It's not because the wizard flag is novel and fun. Don't you think the assignments given by the professors are getting harder and harder? If you don't work hard now, what will you do at the end of the term? Yvonne glanced at Harry, and sighed after a long time. Yvonne knows that his talent is mediocre, coupled with the disadvantage of wand fit, among the first-year little wizards, his casting level is basically in the middle and lower reaches of the level. In this case, the only way to improve the evaluation of the professors is to work the knowledge level. Improve my knowledge reserve, answer questions in peacetime, maybe I can get an impression. Ron, do you want to come? After Yvonne finished eating, he packed up and said to Ron. Although Ron's magical talent is better than him, it is only a mid to high level at best. Compared with Harry, the gap is still very obvious. In addition, Ron himself has not worked hard, so he will be iron in the future. The weakest one in the triangle. So in good intentions, Yvonne still reminded him. Even though Yvonne didn't expect Ron to agree. As expected, Ron shook his head quickly. What a joke, we have only been here for a few days, and we are still far from the end of the term. What's the rush? Forget it. Yvonne didn't care, and walked straight to the library. Look, Yvonne will be back in an hour at most, or I will eat the board. Ron muttered a bet. Hogwarts Library has the most complete magic books in the UK and even in Europe. From ordinary teaching books to esoteric curses and black magic, it can be described as everything. Yvonne, who came to the library for the first time, was also shocked by the huge collection of books. Rows of bookshelves are closely connected together. There are as many as 1,000 magic books on each shelf, far more than Ivan's previous life. The movie is much more spectacular. Perhaps because of the beginning of school, there are not many little wizards in the library. They rely on the bookshelves or the promenade in 2s and 3s, but they vacate the rest area in the middle. Ding! Explore the library. The system sound in his mind brought Ivan's attention back, and after a closer look, he discovered that the task of exploring Hogwarts in the task tree had increased by 5% at one time. And more importantly, counting the increased academic points, you can just make up the 100 academic points needed to redeem the SWIBA experience card. Yvonne couldn't help but look at the forbidden book area. The magic he was looking for could be found here. Child, you reading www.yuyugonshu.com, are you looking for any books? Mrs. Irma Pins, who is a librarian, walked over and asked softly. Yes, ma'am, where is the book related to the Transfiguration curse? The more basic one is best. Yvonne withdrew his gaze from the restricted book area and turned to Mrs. Pins. Follow me. Mrs. Pins directed Yvonne to a bookshelf, took a beginner's transformation guide from the shelf, and handed it to Yvonne. Then the words paused and continued. What you just saw was the restricted book zone. Unless you can get the authorization of the professors, you are not allowed to view or borrow related books. I'm just a little curious, but I don't plan to actually go in. Yvonne took the book in his hand and shrugged casually. Yvonne was not going to watch these dangerous banned books in the near future. After all, with his current magic foundation, it is not suitable to learn these advanced magic. Anyway, there is still a whole semester, so I will talk about it when I have a free time and a chance. After Mrs. Pins finished explaining to Yvonne, Jianchuo turned around and left. After all, she had to stare at the little wizards of the higher grades. Almost every once in a while, there would be little wizards trying to break into the restricted area. Of course, before leaving, Mrs. Pins did not forget to remind Yvonne that no noise is allowed in the library. When I walked to the rest area and sat down, Yvonne was not in a hurry to experiment with the effects of the SWIBA experience card. Instead, he flipped through the book and prepared to watch it in a normal state for a while, then compare see how you can increase your learning efficiency several times. Soon there was only the sound of turning pages in the lounge, and occasionally I interrupted my thoughts because of a little noise from elsewhere. Chapter 7, I suddenly became stupid? The quiet environment made Yvonne thank the administrator Mrs. Pants very much in his heart. The library prohibition of loud noise is indeed necessary. As the basic theoretical book of Transfiguration mantra, the difficulty of Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration is not high, but the thick pages obviously cannot be read in a short time. 1 hour passed in a flash, and Ivan's hand only turned over a third of the page. After thinking about it, Yvonne continued to look down at the book, and when he finished reading the whole book, another 1.5 passed. Hour. After watching for more than 2 hours, when Yvonne put down the books, his mind became a little groggy. These age-old magic books usually like to add some strange and unexplainable words. It seems that only in this way can they show the mystery of magic, which makes Yvonne very uncomfortable with people who are accustomed to modern books. Maybe this is a wizard. Yvonne muttered to himself, thinking that this rather metaphysical way of thinking might be the gift of wizards. He can't understand it anyway. Ding, after a period of careful reading, you feel that the Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration is boring and difficult to understand, and the proficiency of the Transfiguration mantra is slightly improved. Note, reading progress of Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration, 27%. The system prompt that sounded in my mind once again exceeded Ivan's expectation, because the corresponding prompt was not triggered when I was reading the textbook during class. Is it to be finished? Ivan suddenly noticed the difference. He hadn't read any magic book before, so the difference should be this. After had an idea in his mind, Ivan turned to complain about the system's prompt sound that was indistinguishable from the game log. Ivan feels that after reading the book, although there are some things that I don't understand, it shouldn't be said to be boring and difficult to understand, right? 27% of the reading progress, Ivan can understand. Everyone who has read the book knows that after reading it, it does not mean that you can remember all the knowledge in the book and use it freely. Otherwise, when taking the exam, wouldn't everyone get full marks? Let's take a look at the so-called SWIBA experience card now. Ivan muttered to himself in a low voice, and then spent 100 points to exchange the SWIBA experience card. Remaining time, 59 minutes and 59 seconds. For an instant, Ivan felt something exploded in his brain. The knowledge he had learned recently and the content of the books he had read seemed to keep pouring out, and within just half a minute. After being classified and summed up, various thoughts gradually became clear. This feeling is like using a worn-out old-fashioned computer and suddenly replacing it with the latest model. A minute later, Ivan opened his closed eyes, and lightly brushed the cover of the book The Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration with his right hand. Although he had not opened it yet, the content he had read before had already surfaced in his mind. Originally felt obscure and difficult to understand, but the words and sentences of God's babble combined with the context seemed to have a new way of interpreting them. The Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration, as the basic book used by Hogwarts to teach little wizards, must have been revised many times, refined and concise, at least for wizards. When Ivan turned the pages of the book and recollected it, Ivan had actually understood the contents of the book in general, and the rest was to revisit the places that I didn't understand before. Page 3, Chapter 2, Page 7, Chapter 13. Ivan's hand was flipping rapidly on the Beginner's Guide to Transformation, and the index of reading progress in his mind also rapidly increased. In less than 20 minutes, Ivan has already read the entire book again. Ding! After a period of careful reading, you think the Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration is simple and clear, without challenges at all, and the proficiency of the Transfiguration spell has been greatly improved. The current progress of reading the Beginner's Guide to Transformation, 100%. Reading reward, 5 points for academic achievement. Transfiguration has reached level 1, current proficiency, 12/200, reward 5 points. At the moment Ivan put down the book, 2 reminders rang in his mind. It is worth mentioning that the upgrade of the Transfiguration spell, Ivan did not feel any, neither did he feel the upgrade effect of a golden light in place, nor did he feel any other enhancement effects. Only after understanding the principle of the transformation curse, Ivan felt that releasing the transformation curse was no longer a problem. At least the trick of turning a match into a silver needle was already easy for Ivan. Even holding the wand that is not very aura will not affect his performance, at best, the effect is slightly weaker. This is the same as Ivan previously guessed. The proficiency and increase will not directly increase his strength, but more equivalent to expressing his strength through proficiency. Seeing that the expiration time of the SWIBA experience card was about 37 minutes, Ivan did not stop at all, sprinted to the bookshelf and picked up the most recent copy of Basic Magic Principle Detailed Explanation and turned it over. As soon as I started, Ivan felt that the book was thicker than he thought. The content in the book www.yuyuganshu.com is the analysis of commonly used magic spells and some conjectures about the composition of magic. If this kind of purely theoretical books were replaced at other times, Ivan would probably find it boring, but this time I read it vigorously. Even the system prompts that sounded in Ivan's mind halfway through, Ivan did not go. Go on, immerse yourself in the ocean of knowledge. However, Ivan, who was halfway through the book, suddenly changed his expression slightly. He felt that his clear brain was covered with a white mist, and his thoughts were forcibly interrupted. This kind of feeling is as if someone was shocked and forced to hold back when the water was released to the heart's content. I suddenly became stupid? Ivan stared blankly at the detailed explanation of the magic spell in front of him, and for a while it was a little difficult to adapt to the change in his IQ. Ivan didn't react until he stood there for a while, tapped his dizzy head lightly, and took a closer look at the time for the 30 minutes of SWIBA experience card that had passed. Ivan looked at the half of the unread pages in his hand, and reopened it unwillingly, but the content of the other half suddenly became esoteric and incomprehensible. The efficiency of reading suddenly decreased by several times, which made it feel. Ivan who has passed the bonus of SWIBA mode is difficult to accept. Seeing a few pages, Ivan sighed and put down the book in his hand. After experiencing the SWIBA mode for an hour, Ivan has a deep understanding of the power of this exchange. This is not just a question of increasing the learning speed several times, including the overall improvement of understanding and thinking ability, and it can completely turn a scumbag into a scholastic or even a scholastic existence. There are almost no incomprehensible problems in learning knowledge, Just learn it. Chapter 8. Everyone has their own learning method. In the process of the experiment just now, Ivan also noticed a hidden factor, that is, his own knowledge accumulation will also affect the efficiency and speed of learning. This is why it only takes about 20 minutes to read the Beginner's Transformation Guide, and the time to read the Basic Magic Principle is much slower, 30 minutes only half the time. The quick reading of the Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration, on the one hand, is because Ivan himself has some foundation to release the transfiguration spell, and on the other hand, because he has read this book just now and has an understanding of the content of the book. And the detailed explanation of basic mantra principles involves a wide range of knowledge, and Ivan has not read it in advance, so the reading speed is relatively slow. After analyzing the advantages and disadvantages of the SWIBA experience card, Ivan immediately realized that he wanted to make good use of this hour. The most optimized solution was to read the corresponding book first, and then use the SWIBA experience card after reading it. Improve your comprehension and thinking skills and review it again, so that you can make the most of your time. And every time you understand a magic book thoroughly, you will be rewarded with academic points. In addition to increasing the level of the magic spell, the accumulated academic points can be used to exchange for the SWIBA experience card. Under such a cycle, isn't the strength? Will advance by leaps and bounds? Just now Ivan just finished half of the detailed explanation of basic mantra principles. All the spells he knows have increased a lot of proficiency. Among them, the levitating curse and the disarming curse have risen to the same level as the transfiguration curse, and they are rewarded again. 10 academic grade points. This makes Ivan's grade points that were cleared to 0 again by 20 points, which greatly reduces the time to gather grade points next time. Thinking of this, Ivan looked at the vast magic books in the library, and suddenly realized that, these are all grade points. If I can read them all, it is difficult for Ivan to imagine how much his strength will grow. Thinking of this, Ivan regained his fighting spirit. However, things were counterproductive. When Ivan was about to work hard, he was told that it was time for the lights to be turned off in the library. Ivan then realized that he had been in the library for more than 3 hours. Children, it is important to learn knowledge, but it is also important to pay attention to the combination of work and rest. As for now, give me back to the dormitory of the respective college. Mrs. Pins drove away the little wizards who were still planning to stay in the library. As the librarian at Hogwarts, she certainly does not hate the little wizard who likes knowledge, as long as she doesn't make a big noise in the library, but the principal of the library has regulations on the opening hours, and Mrs. Pins does not good extension. Ivan stepped forward at this moment, took half of the detailed explanation of basic magic principles in his hand, and gestured. Madam, can I borrow this book? Of course, as long as it can be returned within the specified time. Mrs. Pins glanced at the book and nodded casually after seeing the title of the book. After speaking, Mrs. Pins turned to search in the library. There are always a few people who like to hide themselves in a sea of books, with the intent to get through it, waiting for the lights to be turned off and then slip into the forbidden book area. Of course, there are some people who are fascinated and forget the time. Thank you. Ivan politely nodded his head and thanked him, and then took the book and left the library. He couldn't wait to go back and try the magic that gained promotion. Let me. Yet. Ivan, who hadn't walked a few steps before, only had time to hear a few crisp female voices behind him, and felt that he was hit by someone, and his forehead was in close contact with the wall, and then he sat down. On the ground, the detailed explanation of basic mantra principles in his hand also fell to the ground. Fortunately, the force of the impact was not heavy, so Ivan touched his flushed forehead and got up. Ivan picked up the book first, and then he noticed the little girl who bumped into him carelessly. The first thing that catches the eye is the thick brown hair, which is messy and obviously lacks the owner's care. The standard wizard robe looks a bit wide when worn, and there are several magic books scattered on the side. Hermione. Ivan was stunned, but quickly figured out the situation. It is estimated that when our know-it-all lady was kicked out of the library by Mrs. Pins, she was too anxious, so she ran into him directly from behind. Ivan. Hermione was hit hard at once, until she was supported by Ivan before she stood up. Oh, sorry, I might have been a little confused before, I didn't expect to bump into you. It's okay, just pay attention next time. After Ivan picked up the book on the floor and handed it back to Hermione, he shook his head and said he didn't care. Hermione, however, immediately opened the chattering box after seeing the book in Ivan's hand, and said incessantly. I also borrowed this book detailed explanation of basic magic principles before, and I learned many new magic skills. My god, I didn't even know that strong will can greatly increase the power of some spells, but this requires wizards to have a high magic control ability, otherwise, it is very likely to make the magic is out of control. At this point, Hermione seemed to be thinking of something, her voice became louder and said. By the way, learning requires understanding and memorization, not just flipping through the book from beginning to end. Rather than reading books like Basic Mantra Principles, I think you should memorize all the textbooks first. Hermione confided her thoughts or experience in a burst of cannonballs. Perhaps she was helping Yvonne consciously, and there was always a sense of superiority. Yvonne knew that Hermione must have seen her learning with the SWIBA experience card in the second half, so I kindly reminded her, but Hermione's high-pitched tone still made Yvonne frown insignificantly. Thank you for reminding, but I think everyone has their own way of learning. Yvonne said lightly, and then I understood a little bit why Harry, Ron, and other little wizards shouldn't wait to see Hermione, who is smart. I have to say that before Halloween, Miss Granger's character is really not very likable. How is this possible? Hermione still wanted to continue preaching, but Yvonne interrupted her as soon as she spoke. Quick deformation. Yvonne waved his magic wand and tapped it on the parchment that Hermione used to make notes. The paper vibrated slightly, and then it swelled and deformed, and the slightly rough parchment surface slowly became smooth. No time. Right in front of Hermione, within a second or two, Yvonne went from chanting the spell to waving his wand in one go. The standard was just like the demonstration by Professor McGonagall in class, and the parchment has now become a thin jade slab. Chapter 9, Fear Curse. Hermione opened her mouth wide and her face was full of disbelief. She still remembered that in the polymorphology class yesterday, Yvonne obviously couldn't stabilize the polymorph spell. Why did she become so powerful today? After completing the transformation, Yvonne didn't even stay longer, leaving Hermione, who was still standing in a daze, and left alone and returned to the Gryffindor lounge. Yvonne, who was holding a book, was walking on the way back to the bedroom, and just hit Harry and Ron, who were holding the wizard flag, and the two of them had a ghostly expression. Ron looked at the detailed explanation of basic spell principles in Ivan's hand, his eyes were about to stare, and the knight he was holding in his right hand fell onto the table with a snap. The armor of the knight who fell from the sky was smashed and smashed. He cursed and slashed the nail of Ron's left hand with a toothpick-thick sword. Oh, it hurts. Ron's left hand trembled sharply, flying the knight to the side, then looking at his cracked nails, angrily picked up the cup and smashed the knight who had hurt him, and then threw them all into the box. Waiting for automatic repair. Then Ron clutched his thumb and said to Harry with a worried expression on his face. Harry, do you think Yvonne will become like Hermione in the future? This, shouldn't it? Harry was also a little unsure. The two shuddered at the thought of the two Hermiones pointing at them. Yvonne returned to the dormitory, not knowing that Harry and Ron were talking about themselves in the lounge. At this meeting, Ivan's attention has long shifted to the changes in various values in the system. Yvonne Halls. Occupation, Wizard. Enchantments, Fear Curse Level 1, 6/200, Floating Curse Level 1, 12/200, Transformation Curse Level 1, 30/200, Disarming Curse Level 1, 16/200, Bright Curse Level 1, 1/200. Knowledge Theory, Magic Item Making Level 0, 435/500, Basic Magic Principle Level 0, 88/100. Magic Item, Magic Wand, Wood, Unicorn Hair, 11 inches and 3/4 long. Magic, Medium. Fit, 72.5%. Academic Points, 20. Only 1 hour of Learning Master Experience card, the improvement is not small. Ivan's spells have basically been upgraded to a level. Just as the other people in the dormitory were not there, Yvonne used boxes, stools, pillows, etc. to experiment with the power of the levitating curse and the disarming curse. Yugadam Leviosa. Accept your weapon. After a few minutes of self-entertainment, Yvonne looked at the pillows from the head of the bed that was bombarded by the disarming curse to the end of the bed, as well as the boxes and stools floating in the air slowly falling down, filled with a sense of accomplishment. This is the power of magic. For this mysterious and unpredictable supernatural ability, few people can resist its temptation. What's more, before he died from a serious illness in his previous life, Yvonne, who was lying on the hospital bed, liked to read all kinds of magic and fantasy books. It's a pity that in the past few days Yvonne has just passed through, due to various reasons, even the most basic spell has not been successfully released. Now that several magics have been released at once, Yvonne is naturally excited. Now no matter what I see, Yvonne wants to throw a transformation spell and a floating spell on it. After experimenting for more than 10 minutes, Ivan's brain has become a little groggy, which is obviously a sign of magic overdraft. In the process of frequently casting spells, Yvonne probably understood the limit of his ability. The first is the levitating curse. Yvonne can hover an empty box 1 meter in the air for nearly 40 seconds at most, or float his bed for 5 seconds, but the height of the suspension is only about 30 centimeters. Is followed by a transformation spell, which can change an object's form or even its nature into another object within a period of time. This is also the spell that Yvonne is most interested in. After practicing to the depths, he can even turn inanimate objects into living animals like Professor McGonagall. I just don't know if this transformation spell can be used against wizards. For example, when facing an enemy, a transformation spell will turn the enemy into a tree, a brick, a pig, a cow, a sheep, or turning the shields in front of and behind the hostile wizard into beasts and traps, which can also have the effect of defeating the enemy with one blow. But Ivan frowned when he thought of this, because in retrospect he realized that in the original book, it seems that few people would do this. Even Professor McGonagall, who is proficient in the transformation spell, did not apply the transformation spell on the hostile wizard in the final battle. Is it because ordinary transformation spells cannot be used on living bodies? The transformable curse is powerful enough to transform non-living forms into living forms. There is no reason to reverse this process. Hagrid also used the spell to make the little fat Dudley who bullied Harry grow a pigtail. Draco also has a black history of being transformed into a ferret, which shows that the transformation spell can directly act on the human body. Is it because of the influence of magic? Does the wizard possess certain resistance to the transformation spell? The stronger the resistance, the more stacks? What is that magic power? Why can wizards use all kinds of incredible magic? Ivan thought of the only animagus transformation that can affect a powerful wizard. Even such a powerful and difficult magic can only transform the wizard into a specific animal, and it cannot achieve the desired form at will. This is more like a solidified transformation spell, allowing the wizard to switch back and forth between the two forms without flaws and no time limit. Forget it, what do I want to do now? Ivan lightly stroked his forehead. He is just a first-year little wizard, and the curse is only a level that can be released. It's no use thinking so much. After experimenting all the levitating curses, transforming curses, brightening curses, and disarming curses, reading www.uukonshu.com, Ivan probably had an estimate of his own strength. Is about the more powerful level among ordinary first-year little wizards. After experimenting with the effects of ordinary spells, Ivan put his gaze on the fear spell, which is a black magic. This curse that appeared in the system after he crossed to Hogwarts, Ivan had never used it before. Fear is coming. Ivan recalled the sequence of releasing magic in his memory, waving his wand and hitting Maka's head. Goo, a dim purple light flashed. Maka tilted his head and looked at Ivan innocently. It's no use. Ivan looked at Maka, who didn't respond, and couldn't help but feel a little strange. Fear is coming, fear is coming. Ivan cast spells one after another, and the purple light directly enveloped Maka, but Maka thought that Ivan was playing with it, so he held the tip of the wand with his hook-shaped beak and pulled it up. Ivan reluctantly took the wand back, otherwise he would be broken by Maka, and then looked at the fear curse in the system magic bar. Logically speaking, he should be able to release normally after the first level of the spell. Or... Ivan suddenly remembered the memory that popped in his mind when he was invaded by the Sorting Hat. Fear. Ivan closed his eyes and thought for a while, then opened his eyes just to see the grey-black mouse dozing on Ron's table. After a little thought, Ivan let go of the owl Maka, who was his messenger. Holding the wand and walking over. And Zebra is sleeping soundly right now. There are still scented beans in the corners of his mouth, his small paws are divided into 4 fingers, and occasionally unconsciously scratching on the table. It seems that he is having a dream. Chapter 10, Scattered. What happened to you? Spotty? Fear is coming. Ivan waved his magic wand and pointed it on Scaly's head. Squeak. 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 As soon as the spell came into effect, the grey-black mouse immediately went mad, his closed eyes blazed for an instant, and his mouth screamed with red ears. Immediately after kicking his powerful claws on the table, the whole mouse rolled off the table like flying, knocking down a lot of cups and decorations along the way, and scurrying in the bedroom. Ivan finally let go of seeing the effects so well. Unexpectedly, the principle of the fear curse is the opposite of the principle of calling the gods. The latter requires the operator to recall good and happy things, while the former requires the operator to imagine a terrible event or experience into the mind of the person being operated on. Is like a reverse mindset, or a horror plus version. When cast a spell on Shaban, Ivan conceived a scene where Shaban was chased by a black dog. Perhaps it was because Shaban was in his sleep before casting the spell, the power of the fear spell was combined with his sleep, and the effect of this black magic was much stronger than Ivan had imagined. While Ivan was still happy about successfully releasing the fear curse, Ron and Harry, who had heard the noise in the lounge, also rushed in at this time. Looking at a messy dormitory, Harry almost thought he was in the wrong place, and was about to ask questions, but Ron saw the grey-black mice running around in the dormitory. Oh, no. Zebra. Zebra. What's wrong with you? Zebra. Ron yelled in a crushing voice, and rushed into the dormitory after a few quick steps, and rushed to Neville's bed, trying to catch him just running past. Grey-black mouse. But at this time, Scabbard was very frightened by Ivan's magic. He regarded Ron as the black dog in his dream, and with a swish, he went under the bed from the gap between the edge of the bed, making it easy for Ron to find it for a while. Ivan, what happened here? Harry looked at Ivan, who was staying at the table. I'm just practicing the spell here. Yvonne shrugged, and then said with a slight guilty conscience. Just as you see, there may be a small accident. Harry looked at Ron, who got under the table and was so ashamed by the mouse that he had found nothing. He felt that the accident was not small at all, so he finally sighed helplessly. Then we might have to catch mice all night. Fortunately, the final situation was not as bad as Harry thought. After the three people tossed for a long time, Yvonne, who remembered that he was a wizard, seized an opportunity to use the levitating curse to float Scabbard, who was planning to hide under the book, and even the book and the mouse to float, and the farce finally died down. Up. In the next few days, Ron was sulking for several days. After Yvonne Lee's loss, he naturally had to apologize and bought some multi-flavored beans as a spare grain for Zebra, and Harry persuaded him. Ron didn't hold on to the splatter anymore. It is worth mentioning that Hermione, who heard about it, bluntly mocked Ron for seeing a mouse more important than a friend. The two also quarreled. As a result, Ron almost didn't get mad. As for Scab, Ron also cared more and more, and even took it with him in class. From time to time, he always felt that someone wanted to harm his mouse. On the other hand, Yvonne continued to live a life of classroom library dorm room at 3 o'clock and one line. He read some basic books and barely made up the opportunity to use the Swiba experience card again. Over the past few days, Ivan's spell proficiency has improved a lot. This caused the professor to give a grade higher than before in class. Except for Professor Binns, who teaches history, he only gives general evaluations every time. In other classes, Yvonne has a good record. Especially in the spell and transformation classes, because Ivan's transformation and floating spells have successfully broken through to the second level. Once a plank was deformed, even a little faster than Hermione, and both Harry and Ron were stunned. But if you want to upgrade, it won't be so easy, because every time the level of the spell increases by one level, the proficiency required for the next upgrade will double that of the last time. In addition to studying, Yvonne is also looking for a place in the House of Requirement as a place to test the power of the spell in the future. It's always inconvenient in the Gryffindor lounge. It's a pity that after reading the original for so many years, Yvonne didn't remember it for a long time, only that it was opposite a tapestry, so that he didn't find it for several days. It wasn't until the Friday of the second week when Harry received Hagrid's invitation letter that Ivan's regular life was broken. Of course, there is good news and bad news. The bad news is that they have to take 2 potions lessons with Slytherin this Friday. It would be nice if we could skip this morning. Snape, the professor of the potions class, is the dean of Slytherin. George told me that. Let's be careful. In the corridor of the aisle, Ron and Yvonne talked about the gossip they had heard from their 2 older brothers, and they did not forget to feed the spot on the right hand. Isn't it? Professor McGonagall is also the dean. I haven't seen her favoritism. Hermione couldn't help but retorted. I'm not the only one who thinks so. Many senior Gryffindors say so. Ron was very disdainful of Hermione's rhetoric. You read www.yuyugonshu.com and turn to face Harry and Yi. Fan said. Do you think that is the case too? Professor Snape has been so dark all day, and there are even rumors in the school that Professor Snape used to be a dark wizard. When talking about the rumors, Ron obviously lowered his voice so as not to be heard by others. Impossible, Professor Dumbledore wouldn't let a dark wizard come to the academy. Harry shook his head. Although Harry felt that Professor Snape, who taught the potions class, seemed to dislike him at the banquet at the beginning of school, but in the past few days at school, teaching professors in various subjects has been quite good. No matter how bad Snape is, it won't go bad. Hermione also nodded again and again, and Ron had no choice but to turn his head to look at Yvonne. At this time, Yvonne was holding a multi-flavored bean and teasing Scaly. When he heard a few people talking, he glanced at Harry and said, Professor Snape's needle is not aimed at Gryffindor. I don't know, but it must be aimed at us. At this point, Yvonne is also a little depressed. It is impossible for him to get an excellent evaluation in Snape's class. After all, I love the House and the Crow, and hate the House and the Crow. Even if Snape gave him a bad review after class, Yvonne would not be surprised. Harry was seen by Yvonne a little inexplicably. I really didn't understand what Yvonne meant. Are you saying that Professor Snape hates Harry? Hermione frowned, guessing what Yvonne was thinking from the look at Harry before. Yvonne admired Hermione's tact in his heart, but he couldn't tell the truth, so he shook his head. I'm just skeptical. Don't you think that Professor Snape looks something wrong every time he looks at Harry? Chapter 11, Potions Class. Harry was deeply impressed, but he couldn't help but speak as he saw Yvonne feeding the multi-flavored beans to Scabbard all the time. Yvonne, if you continue to feed like this, Scabbers are about to die. Hearing Harry said this, Hermione, who was thinking of continuing to ask questions, turned her attention to Scab on Ron's hand. The mouse, which was originally skinny with its hair tied together, has now changed its appearance. After scurrying around in the dormitory, the spots were cleaned by Ron with a brush, and after being fed these days, they are now obviously a little fatter. Why? This amount of feeding is normal. In the past, Zebra was hungry and thin, so I should have an extra meal. Yifan insisted on his opinion, and once again handed a piece of multi-flavored beans to Zebra's mouth. Furthermore, this can be regarded as an expression of my apologies. Yvonne said again. Shaban's performance was not even the slightest bit of empathy. He glared at Yvonne angrily, and his little paw arrogantly pulled Ivan's hand away. Until Shaban realized that his small paws were not enough for Ivan's power, then he took a bite of the multi-flavored beans that had been sent to him. After all, it's the lips, no matter how angry you are, you have to eat rice, right? I can't resist anyway. In fact, taste carefully, except for the individual flavors, the multi-flavored beans are quite delicious. Noting the weakening of the resistance, Yvonne couldn't help but sigh that Pettigrew Peter has been working for so many years. Nothing else works, but his mentality is quite stable. Ming Ming was still being chased by the most scared person a few nights ago, and after only one night, he was able to continue to feast on. Even though the chase was in a dream. But this also means that Peter Pettigrew doesn't know the dark magic of the fear curse. Maybe he just thought Yvonne used some magic to turn his dream into a nightmare. After all, Yvonne, the little wizard, has no reason to know what happened 11 years ago, let alone know that Sirius Animagus is a black dog. What if I raise too much fat? Ron looked at the special attention of Yvonne and said with some concern. It's okay, you don't need to send a letter to Scab, and you can save it from running around. Yvonne comforted. Yvonne thought to himself that Voldemort's resurrection plan would not have been so easy to succeed if it weren't for Peter Pettigrew. When the time comes to feed the fat into the ball, Yvonne wants to see if Shaban is chased by Crookshanks and Sirius, but can't run. A few people walked towards the basement where the potions class is located while chatting. When they walked into the classroom, Harry and Ron believed the rumor that Snape was a dark wizard again. The whole classroom is not big, but the atmosphere is a bit dark and terrifying. There are some glass bottles around, and the bottles are filled with blue-green liquid. Some animals can still be immersed in the liquid. In addition, the classroom is built underground. If it weren't for Hogwarts, Yvonne would have thought it was the secret laboratory of the Dark Wizard. Get to your seats, we have to be careful in this class. Ron said. At this time, Ron had no doubt about George's previous words, and quickly took Yvonne, Harry and Hermione to sit down, lest Snape found a reason for the deduction. However, Yvonne knew in his heart that Snape would make up an excuse to find fault even if they had a good class. After the little wizards of the two academies sat down, the gloomy door was suddenly pushed open, and the sound of the door hitting the wall reverberated in the classroom. Not long after, a thin figure walked in through the gate, his sallow skin covered under the long black cloak, his indifferent eyes swept across the little wizards, and it was only momentary when his eyes touched Harry. Stopped for a while, and the hook-like nose made him look like a giant human-shaped bat. Snape walked all the way to the front of the stage, waving his wand with his right hand, and the curtains around him were automatically pulled down. Without the sunlight shining into the basement through the windows, the classroom immediately became darker. When the light became dim, Yvonne clearly noticed that Snape's tight expression relaxed slightly. After finishing all this, the potion master looked around the little wizards who were restrained by his aura while taking the starting list. I will be a full name next, I hope no one will dare to disappear in my class. Snape's low voice began to reverberate in the classroom, and the naughty little wizards were all quiet. At this time, only Draco Malfoy of Slytherin could laugh. Neville Longbottom. Yvonne Halls. Harry Potter. Snape's plain tone fluctuates slightly when he says Harry's name. Ha, by the way, I almost forgot. Snape was expressionless, but there seemed to be a hint of sarcasm in his words. There is a new celebrity in our school. The little wizards all around looked towards Harry when they heard the words, and Draco and two of his followers even snickered in private. Was inexplicably targeted to make Harry a little uncomfortable, but what he didn't know was that this was just the beginning. Snape turned his head and no longer looked at Harry, but at all humanity. You come here, you reading www.yuyugonshu.com is to learn the subtle techniques of pharmacy. Since there is no silly wave of wands here, many of you don't believe that this is magic. I don't expect you to truly understand the beauty of pharmaceutical technology. Snape said. There was a pause, then he spoke with a fascinating taste. Think about it, when you simmer medicinal materials in a big steam pot, the medicinal water slowly boils, and white smoke curls up, and the liquid flowing in the veins of the human body, the liquid with incomparable subtle power, it can almost make you be drunk and fascinate all your senses. I can teach you how to can fame, how to brew glory, and even say, stop death, as long as you don't be as stupid as the bunch of stupid people I taught before. Snape spoke a long time after speaking. Potter, if the powder of the narcissus bulb is added to the wormwood juice, what will be the consequences? Harry looked blank. What is narcissus? What is wormwood? Harry looked at Ron for help. Ron also looked blank. Hermione held her right hand high, but Snape just pretended not to see it. Ivan was far away, and could only open his mouth, silently vomiting the words of stagnant water and sleeping pills. Harry was a little eager, but Snape's compelling gaze made him afraid to look at Ivan. Naturally, he couldn't guess what Ivan was talking about. After a long time, he could only spit out a few words with difficulty. I don't know the professor. Ivan helplessly supported his forehead with his hand. He has tried his best. It is useless even if he tells Harry the answer in advance, unless Harry can memorize all the books about potions, otherwise Snape has a way to target Harry. Chapter 12, Poor Scaly. Then watching Harry gradually shut himself up under Snape's repeated questioning, Ivan remembered a conjecture he had seen in his previous life. These several questions that Snape asked Harry had a deeper meaning. The most obvious is that the Narcissus, asphodel, used to prepare potions is interpreted in Latin as my regrets follow you out to the grave, my regrets walk into the grave with you. Wormwood, usually implies pain and regret. It was hard for Ivan to imagine what kind of emotion Snape, who was somber and bitter, faced Harry when he faced Harry. Are you ashamed of Lily's death by leaking information? Or is it the affection that knows that the lover has died and is willing to die together? Thinking like this, Ivan's eyes gradually became more compassionate. Ivan Halls. Or he noticed something wrong with Ivan's eyes. After asking Harry 3 questions, Snape turned his wand and pointed at Ivan. Next you will answer these 3 questions. Ivan was stunned at first. He didn't expect Snape to ask himself a question, but he quickly reacted and replied. Adding the powder of the narcissus bulbs to the wormwood juice will give you life and death water. It is a powerful sleeping pill. The bezoar is in the stomach of the cow, and the boat-shaped aconite and the Camajasm aconitum refer to the same plant. Of course Ivan, who has read the original, will not be stumped by these 3 questions, but Ivan is also a little worried, for fear that Snape is asking other questions. Even though Ivan had read the potions textbook several times before taking the potions class, Snape obviously would not follow the routine. He asked Harry 3 questions before, none of them were in the 1st grade. What should be learned? Ding, you answered the difficult problem carefully prepared by the professor in class, and you answered the questions 3 times, with a 100% correct rate, and 9 points for academic achievement. Unexpected system sounds sounded in Ivan's mind. Ivan's face instantly changed from worry to surprise and then immediately turned into ecstasy, and all his original worries were thrown aside. Come. Even if you ask the question, frown it and count me as losing. Ivan looked at Snape resolutely. True warriors never fear any challenge. It's best to have 10 questions and 8 questions. Ivan doesn't believe that he can't even know a single question. It's a little bit more academic point. Ivan's face-changing skills impressed all the little wizards. However, to Ivan's expectation, Snape didn't even look at him. Instead, he turned his head blankly and mocked Harry. Have you heard, Potter? It seems that not every little wizard who just started school is as stupid and ignorant as you. Professor, Harry stood up angrily and planned to refute it, but Snape interrupted Harry's words neatly. Potter. Because of your performance, Gryffindor got 1 point deducted. After speaking as if reading a verdict, Snape turned around mercilessly to continue teaching, while Harry was dragged by Ron desperately, his original white cheeks flushed with anger. Just getting ready to face Snape's troublesome Ivan, facing such a neglect was a bit inexplicable. After a slightly apologetic glance at Harry, he had to continue listening to the class with peace of mind. Looking forward to when Snape will continue to pose questions to make things difficult for himself. It was a pity for Ivan that in the next class, Snape seemed to forget him in general. Apart from occasionally taking time out to scold the little wizards who made the wrong steps, he only had a great deal with Harry. Strong interest. He is like an iron block attracted by a magnet, constantly wandering around Harry, his hollow eyes carefully looking at every step of Harry's potion refining. If there is a little mistake, it is a meal. A ridiculous mockery. Ron, who was sitting next to Harry, was also unlucky. Snape found out the mouse spots he was carrying with him. He carried his tail and publicly designated a white mouse with the effect of the experimental potion. Ron almost cried on the spot. When I learned my destiny, the screaming cries called a miserable. If it wasn't for Neville's accidental act of burning through the crucible in the end that spoiled Snape's interest, Shaban would be forced to drink the feces yellow potion made by Ron with unknown ingredients. Ivan glanced sympathetically at the limp spots on the table, and sighed that Peter Pettigrew's bad fortune had been frightened twice in just a few days since he came to school. The 1-hour potions class time, for most young wizards, is simply suffering. After class, they all escape from the dungeon. Oh my god, how could Dumbledore hire Snape as a professor? He almost killed Shaban. After finishing the potions class, Ron calmed the shivering Shaban while angrily wanted to smash the wall. Harry nodded in agreement, and stood on the same front with Ron. He was so clearly targeted in the first class of school, and no one could bear it. Harry really couldn't understand why Snape hated him so much. Harry, if you can read more books before class, you won't be able to answer Professor Snape's questions. UU reading www.uugonshu.com. Hermione had a different idea, and she read it after she said it. Look at Yvonne, then continued. Like Yvonne, Professor Snape knows that Yvonne can answer it, so he won't make things difficult for him. Hermione's appreciation made Yvonne really ashamed. If he didn't know the plot, he might not be able to answer Snape's question. Hermione, not everyone can memorize the potions book within a few days of school. Besides, the questions Snape asked Harry were not in the first grade textbook. Yvonne sighed. Hermione pursed her mouth and did not refute, because she also saw what Snape did in the potions class today, but she was accustomed to abide by the law and obey the professor's arrangements before opening it in Ron. When spraying, helped to say a few words of excuse. Ron and Harry were very dissatisfied with Hermione's act of helping Snape speak. The three of them walked awkwardly. Thanks to Ivan's persuasion, they finally got rid of the three before they reached Hagrid's cabin. The grievance in my heart. Hagrid, we came to see you. Harry moved forward and knocked on the door, and then a group of 4 heard dogs barking and running from inside the house. After a while, the door was opened and a huge figure came out of the house. Came out. Harry, you are here, come in soon. Hagrid greeted Harry enthusiastically, while still not forgetting to calm his restless dog. Yvonne followed Harry into the hut. There is only one room in the whole house, and the layout is a bit messy. There are many dried meat and ham hanging by the window, and there is a large stove in front of it. A pot of boiling water was burning on the stove, and the patched bed was placed on the right side against the wall. Chapter 13, Secrets Hidden in the Restricted Book Zone. Come, sit down, don't be so restrained. Hagrid brought a plate of rock cake to the table, and took the lead and sat down on the chair. The wooden support frame made a creaking sound, which made Yvonne and others look a little worried. Fortunately, the quality of the chair was good. It is still stubbornly supporting the weight that should not be carried. Hagrid, this is Ron, this is Hermione. After sitting down, Harry pointed to the crowd to introduce Hagrid, but Yvonne stood up before he could introduce him. Hello, Hagrid, my name is Yvonne, nice to meet you. Oh, me too. Hagrid stretched out his big hand and shook Yvonne, but the difference between the two figures made the handshake look funny. The big dog teeth in the room were turning around Ron's side, and sometimes they pounced on Ron's saliva. Ron concealed the spots in his pocket as soon as Fang rushed over. Although he had never heard of dogs eating mice, Ron was always a little suspicious after the past few days. It's like someone is deliberately trying to murder his mouse. Next, Harry and Ron were bitter here in Hagrid, telling Snape deliberately about them in class. Hermione frowned, but didn't mean to refute. Yvonne did not participate in their discussion. Although Snape could not understand Harry, he was biased towards the students of Gryffindor, but he still had no problem in teaching. He taught a lot of potions. The recipe was improved by Snape himself. Especially unexpectedly gave him an excellent evaluation in the first potions class, which made Ivan's curse a little unspeakable. Of course, it would be better if Snape could produce more questions in class. Gringotts Bank stolen. Just as Yvonne was so bored that he wanted to try Hagrid's cake roll, a newspaper next to the teapot immediately caught Ivan's interest. Harry and Ron, who were chatting about the sky, also stopped and leaned in front of the newspaper. They saw that it was written on the night of July 31st, that a major robbery occurred in Gringotts. The people concerned believed that it was some black witch or the black wizard did it, but the goblins of Gringotts insisted that nothing was lost. Happened on July 31 St. Harry suddenly yelled as if thinking of something, Hagrid, I remember it happened to be my birthday, and we stayed there too. Really? Hagrid said vaguely, his eyes didn't dare to contact Harry directly, and the blunt topic turned to the rock cake, warmly inviting everyone to eat more. Harry, Ron, and Hermione were all pitted by this hard brick-like rock crust, almost not breaking their teeth, but seeing Hagrid's ardent face, it was not easy to throw them away. Yvonne secretly soaked the rock cake in the tea, trying to soften it a bit, and barely ate half of it in. When he went back, Hagrid was still very enthusiastic, holding a basket of rock cakes and stuffing everyone's pockets a lot, even though they didn't want it. The 4 of them went back to the castle together, and then moved away on the stairs. Harry and Ron returned all the way to the bedroom, while Yvonne took the time to find the trace of the House of Responsiveness in the castle. Because in previous experiments, Yvonne found that no matter how much knowledge is reserved, without actual combat experience, the growth of proficiency may also stop. The search continued until the morning of Tuesday of the second week, when Yvonne found some traces on the 8th floor of the castle. It was a wide corridor with many portraits hung, and at the end was a tapestry of a giant stick beating Barnabas. Yvonne walked to the opposite wall of the tapestry and concentrated on the practice field he needed. After walking back and forth 3 times, a door appeared out of thin air on the originally flat wall. The door extended close to the wall, without the slightest gap, as if it was already here before. Yvonne opened the door with a hint of excitement. After he entered, the door behind him closed automatically. Inside was a large training venue. The hall was decorated brightly and transparently. The left and right rows were filled with dummy for practicing spells. Ding! I found the mysterious place where there is a responsive house. The voice in his mind was as expected by Ivan, but the task of exploration increased by 3 percentage points, which Ivan didn't expect. Knowing that the library that inherits knowledge is only a 5-point increase in progress, which shows how important this place is. Fall to pieces. After Ivan warmed up a bit, he waved his wand to practice the spell he had learned. The white light hit the dummy directly, and the dummy swelled and exploded with one arm with a bang sound. The sawdust flying in the sky was restored by Ivan with a healing spell. In the next half an hour, various colorful lights swept back and forth in the practice room. Transfiguration curse, petrification curse, flying curse, bright curse. After nearly half a month of crazy learning, reading www.yuyuganshu.com, Ivan has learned all the basic spells, although the level is not high, but all have been upgraded to the level of a level, not always the time. Not working. But for the first time, Ivan soon discovered that his spell hit rate was a bit worrying. The fixed target was okay. If it was a moving target, several shots would not necessarily make a single hit. Ivan also tried to redeem a Swiba experience card during actual combat practice, and found that this learning buff is also useful during actual combat practice. The improvement of brain comprehension ability and analysis speed enables Ivan to be faster and more accurate in the process of releasing the spell. The hit rate is greatly improved, and even the movement direction of the distant target and the trajectory of the spell light can be predicted. Trace. This makes it clear that the level of the spell is the same, but in the state of the experience card, Ivan's strength is much higher than usual. I'm stupid, and stronger. Ivan, who once again exited the experience mode, couldn't help sighing. After each use, the decline of his brain comprehension always gave Ivan a feeling of suddenly becoming stupid. After practicing for a whole morning, Ivan's brain was already groggy, and his magic power was almost dry. Taking into account the flight lesson in the afternoon, Ivan left the responsive room after a while, and found one on the 8th floor. The secret road that I walked through, I planned to return to the Hall of Hogwarts all the way. Just as Ivan stepped out of the secret road with his forefoot, the long-lost system alert sounded again. Ding! Explored the unknown underworld. The progress of exploring Hogwarts has reached 40%. Reward grade points, 20 points. Extra bonus, please collect it by yourself in front of the 12th column of the 7 rows of bookshelves in the restricted area between 11 o'clock midnight and 1 a.m. Chapter 14, Flight Lessons with Frequent Conditions. The exploration mission reaches a certain value, and there are additional rewards? Ivan is a little curious. This reward is not directly given out, but to find it in the forbidden book area in the middle of the night, this process always makes Ivan feel a little creepy. But since it was a reward, Ivan decided to go. Anyway, I have seen the ghost and ghost. What else is there to be afraid of at night? In the lobby, Harry and Ron were sitting at a round table eating lunch, and they hurriedly greeted after seeing the dazed Ivan. Ivan, this way. Where have you been this morning? You are so embarrassed. Harry was curious to see Ivan's collapsed appearance. Just find a place to practice the spell. Ivan rolled his eyes, stuck a piece of grilled sausage with a knife and stuffed it into his mouth. He was consumed this morning and didn't eat anything. He almost starved to death. It is the first time that Ivan has consumed his magic power so intensely in so many days. Until now, he still feels dizzy. Ivan was eating up in the hall, while Harry and Ron were excitedly discussing flying skills and the new broomstick, rocket and crossbow. And Ivan only remembered after listening to it for most of the time that there seemed to be a flying lesson in the afternoon, which aroused some interest. After all, flying is almost everyone's dream. Even if you have to ride a broom under your crotch, this enthusiasm is not affected. Slytherin College, it was even more lively. Draco Malfoy was surrounded by everyone, boasting loudly about his previous experience of flying. Before I went to Hogwarts, I would ride a flying broomstick. My dad took me all the way home, and once ran into a muggle plane. If I didn't hide it quickly, I would knock it off. Draco said triumphantly. Ivan just took a sip of goat milk and almost squirted out in public. Hit a plane? So awesome, why don't you go to heaven? Flying so high with a flying broom, without any protection, I'm afraid it would freeze to death long ago. Ivan, have you ever ridden a flying broomstick before? Harry had been upset after listening to Draco's boasting. Now that Ivan has reacted so strongly, he hurriedly asked. No. Ivan shook his head decisively. Even if he had learned it before, he has forgotten. What about you, Ron? Harry said with a glimmer of hope. Ron didn't disappoint Harry. He talked about the scene when he used Charlie's old broom to practice at home. Ivan just watched and listened to Ron and Draco's bragging. Anyway, after the flight class, all of them will be revealed. Sure enough, in the afternoon flight class, following the whistle of the teacher, Mrs. Hooch, among the 20 little wizards present, only Harry summoned the broomstick placed on the ground into his hand. Draco Malfoy, who boasted that he had almost hit an airplane before, tried several times but failed. Fortunately, after listening to the broomstick at the last minute, he flew into Draco's hands obediently and stopped. You lost face in front of Harry. And Ron was miserable, maybe because he shouted too loudly. The broom bounced all of a sudden and hit his forehead directly. Get up! Yvonne called for the broom as Mrs. Hooch demonstrated, but the broom just stayed on the ground and whirled lazily and didn't mean to get up at all. Yvonne was anxious, and couldn't help but regret that he hadn't read a few more flying books before and brushed up on his proficiency. It wasn't until Mrs. Hooch turned her head around that she had a clue to hook the broomstick with his foot and kicked it gently into his hand, becoming the third student to get the magic broomstick. Madame Hooch saw that Yvonne was holding the broom steadily, and she nodded her head appreciatively and taught the other students to go. Harry was a little dumbfounded at Ivan's show operation. Yvonne put his hand in front of his mouth and made a silent gesture to Harry. At the same time, he was relieved. At least this lesson will not be enough. A bad review. As long as you have academic points, riding a broomstick is not easy. However, for the system, there is only one exchange option such as the SWIBA experience card, and Yvonne has also complained for a long time. How come there is no exchange that can enhance talent? He is a mediocre student, what if he pretends to be a tyrant and is dismantled by others? Where can I get a grade point? In order to keep his class evaluation, Yvonne imagined hundreds of handsome riding styles in his mind when Madame Hooch taught other students, as well as the troubles he might encounter in the process of flying. And pray that the tattered broomstick in your hand must give some face. If you can't fly on it, wouldn't it be embarrassing? Let me show you all, I will only demonstrate it once. After seeing everyone holding the broom steadily in their hands, Mrs. Hooch walked to the front and demonstrated the correct riding posture. Wait, as soon as I blow the whistle, you will push hard to the ground, remember to hold your broom tightly. Reading www.yuyugonshu.com and try to rise to a few feet. Madame Hooch commanded the crowd loudly, and Yvonne also rode the broomstick in time, preparing to experience the first high-altitude flight. However, before Yvonne could try, Neville, who was not far away, flew from the spot to high altitude with a loud scream in mid-air. Ah! Navely flew out at least 20 feet high in horror. The little wizards underneath were all messed up. Yvonne remembered that Neville seemed to fall and took out the staff first. Yugatum Leviosa! Yvonne waved a floating spell and shot it at Neville, who was falling rapidly from mid-air. The power of magic instantly stopped Neville's fall, hanging in the air over 3 meters above him. Madame Hooch's high-hanging heart also let go. God knows how worried she was just now. If Neville had a problem with her professor's flight class, Madame Hooch felt that she would have no face here at Hogwarts. See, I stayed. Good job, Gryffindor adds 5 points. Madame Hooch gave Yvonne an admiring look. At the same moment, Yifun also received a prompt to increase his grade point, and he was slightly happy. The students of Gryffindor also applauded under the leadership of Harry and Ron. But before everyone's palms were slapped a few times, Neville fell directly from mid-air. The scene was very embarrassing. Sorry, Madame Hooch, I seem to have run out of magic power. Ivan's smile stuck on his face, and then she shrugged helplessly. After practicing the spell all morning, he had just caught the rapidly descending NA way is pretty good. Anyway, the grade points have been obtained, and the 5 points added will be deducted back. Chapter 15, Flight Lessons with Frequent Conditions. Mrs. Hooch didn't mean to blame Yvonne, but hurried to Neville to check his injuries. Mrs. Hooch, is Neville all right? Yvonne asked. Yvonne feels that he has buffered a bit, and shouldn't cause more injuries, right? It's not bad, it's just a minor injury. Madame Hooch checked for a while and helped Neville, who had a swollen nose and a swollen face. The scene where Neville fell straight from the sky just now almost frightened her, so even if Neville's injuries were not serious, Madame Hooch insisted on sending him to the medical room. Okay, kids, I want to take Neville to the hospital. Before I come back, I hope you can stay here obediently. No one is allowed to fly privately. After Mrs. Hooch finished speaking, she took Neville, who was still with tears on her face, and walked towards the castle. As they walked farther, the Slytherin students burst into laughter, and Draco Malfoy laughed even more. Did you see it just now? That stupid slug fell from the sky, I guess he won't even dare to ride a broomstick in the future. Enough, Malfoy. Harry couldn't stand it, and stood up for Malfoy to shut up. However, Malfoy did not mean to repent, but taunted even more severely. My God, our Potter is that stupid friend. Of course we are friends, and you are not allowed to be called Neville. Harry said angrily at Malfoy. Yvonne also frowned upon hearing this. But when I first watched the movie, Yvonne knew that Malfoy was a bear kid, but his temperament was not too bad. Yvonne was thinking so, but suddenly he heard Malfoy pointing at him. Friend? Like him, is he a friend who throws the stupid big man from the sky after adding points? Yvonne twitched the corners of his mouth, stepped forward and rolled up his sleeves, punched Malfoy in the face, and knocked Malfoy directly to the ground. MMP, bear children really hate it the most. Do you dare to hit me? I must let my father fire you. Malfoy touched his reddish cheeks, got up from the ground angrily, and said cursingly. Yvonne didn't care about Malfoy's threat. Although the old Malfoy was a director of Hogwarts, he did not have the right to expel a student directly. Dumbledore would not expel him for this trivial matter. After all, he is now somewhat a friend of Harry the Savior. Yvonne, good job. Ron stood up with his sleeves rolled up at this time. He had already seen Malfoy upset. Enough. Yvonne, Ron, what would you think if Mrs. Hooch came back and saw you fighting? You will be fired. Hermione looked at Yvonne and the others angrily, looking a little hysterical. And Malfoy took advantage of Ivan's distraction and flew directly into the air on a broomstick. Perhaps the advantage of high altitude has brought Malfoy a little sense of security. Malfoy, who was beaten up, didn't mean to repent, but took out a crystal ball with greater force, raised it high, and said to everyone. Look at what this is. That stupid crystal ball. Let me think about where I should hide it. How about throwing it in a tree? Are you not that stupid, friend? Come and get it. Malfoy. Harry was almost furious, and despite Hermione's dissuasion, he chased him into the air on a broomstick. Although Harry was flying on a broomstick for the first time, it was steady, and soon the two of them fought in the air. Yvonne naturally planned to go to help when he saw this, put the broom under his crotch, and learned Harry's take-off posture, hoping to experience the feeling of flying. However, the broom seems to have its own ideas. No matter how Yvonne shakes the top of the broom, the latter will not move. Move, move, why don't you move? Yvonne patted the body of the broomstick depressedly, only then did he remember that he hadn't even completed the first step of sensing the broom. Fortunately, before Yvonne stood there stunned for too long, Hermione had already stood in front of Yvonne with her hands open. Yvonne, are you going to violate the school rules too? The little witch stared at Yvonne in front of her with enthusiasm. No, I think Harry could handle it without me. Yvonne hurriedly took the opportunity to throw the broomstick in his hand on the ground, shrugged indifferently, and motioned Hermione to look at the sky. Harry riding a broomstick was just like a fish in the air, and soon suppressed Malfoy. Hermione even wondered if Harry had practiced before he came to school. However, Malfoy obviously wouldn't admit defeat so easily. Seeing that he was not Harry's opponent, Malfoy threw the glass ball in his hand decisively into the distance. Here, then. Malfoy said viciously. The glass ball flew far away under Malfoy's throw. When Harry saw it, he followed up in a rush, almost hitting the bricks of the castle, and then swooped down with the glass ball. No, Harry, stop. Hermione yelled in horror. You reading www.yuyuganshu.com. Malfoy laughed loudly until he saw Harry holding the glass ball in his hand in a beautiful dive, and Malfoy smiled. Frozen on his face. It's just that neither Malfoy nor Harry noticed Professor McGonagall's surprised expression in front of an opened window in the distance. Hermione and the others, who had been worried about Harry, breathed a sigh of relief, and Ron even pulled out his wand. We are going to teach Malfoy a lesson. Leg stand and stop dead. Ron shouted out the leg-locking spell he had just learned in the spell class. In class, Ron used it once by chance, letting an experimental toad jump on its hind legs together for a class. However, luck was not on Ron's side this time. The pitch-black staff just emitted a bunch of weird white smoke without any reaction. Malfoy, who was flying in the sky on a broomstick, was shocked at first, and he was even ready to evade, but he suddenly laughed when he saw Ron's embarrassment. Ron's cheeks were swollen and flushed, and he was so angry that he could not wait to jump into the air and poke the wand in his hand into Malfoy's broken mouth. I'll come here. Seeing Ron's desperate appearance, Yvonne sighed helplessly, and at any rate took a break again. There is no problem with 1 or 2 magic spells. But there was an accident, Yvonne still said to Hermione, who seemed a little at a loss due to various changes. Hermione, do you remember the spell of the floating spell? Of course. Hermione glanced at Yvonne strangely, and nodded dazedly. Ask what this does? That's good. Before Hermione could understand, Yvonne said softly while raising the wand in his hand. Chapter 16, Frequent Flight Lessons. All petrochemicals. Following the petrification spell, Yvonne chanted a grey-white light beam from Ivan's wand and flew towards Malfoy in the distance. In mid-air, the proud Malfoy did not expect Ivan's movements at all. He was sturdily hit by the petrification curse. The original white skin turned into a stiff grey in less than half a second, his expression and the action also stayed at the moment of being petrified. Malfoy in this state couldn't even move a finger, let alone manipulate the broom under him, and immediately fell straight down from the sky. Of course, even though the body is petrified, Malfoy's consciousness is still intact. It's just that if he had a choice, Malfoy would prefer to know nothing. After all, he fell from a high altitude and watched the ground get closer and closer. This feeling of getting closer to death was enough to make people collapse. If it weren't for the petrified Malfoy, he would have started to soar. And the moment Yvonne hit Malfoy with the petrification charm, he turned to face Hermione. Hermione, it's now. The clever little witch understood Ivan's plan the moment I started her hands, but now Hermione obviously has no time to blame Yvonne. She only had time to stare at Yvonne and shouted. Yugadam Leviosa. At this time, Malfoy was also horrified to the extreme, imagining in his mind that he was smashed into several pieces in a petrified state. Malfoy even thought of how old Malfoy would torture Yvonne, Harry, and others to avenge himself after he died. Just when Malfoy was thinking that the Malfoy family was likely to decline due to his unfortunate death, the rapidly falling body stopped abruptly when it was more than 10 centimeters above the ground, and Malfoy could clearly see the floor when he was close. The lines on it. Miss Granger, who successfully cast the spell in an emergency, breathed a sigh of relief, and Yvonne quietly put down his wand. Malfoy. When Malfoy landed steadily, the little wizards of Slytherin College immediately surrounded him. The students of Gryffindor Academy were gloating. After all, Malfoy's pretentious appearance was really annoying. And the only one who is dissatisfied with this is Miss Granger. Yvonne, how can you use a petrification spell on Malfoy? You know, you almost killed him. Hermione glared at Yvonne angrily, her eyes full of increased ability. So your floating spell is very good. If Professor Flitwick sees it, it will definitely give you extra points. Yvonne smiled. Of course, it is impossible for Malfoy to fail just because of one of his petrification spells. At most, he suffers a little bit. Even if Hermione fails to cast the spell, wouldn't he still have him as insurance? Yet. Maybe Professor Flitwick will expel you by the way. Hermione said in an angry voice. Shouldn't be enough, right? Yvonne scratched his head, thinking that some points would be deducted. At most, adding a trophy or a night tour of the Forbidden Forest. If it's the latter, Yvonne thinks it's still pretty good. Of course, Yvonne is definitely not going to go to the Forbidden Forest this semester, nor is he going to die. After all, Quirrell, who was possessed by Voldemort, often likes to wander around in the Forbidden Forest. God knows if he will run into bad luck. So it's better to stay stubborn. If you don't take the initiative, Hogwarts is still safe before the 4th grade. Yvonne recalled his unreliable golden finger. After 4 years, coupled with the fact that he had a system as a cheater, he would always have the ability to save his life, right? Yvonne thought as he walked towards Malfoy. Halfway through, he was stopped by a few Slytherin wizards. The leader was a Slytherin Yvonne who managed to make some reflections, which seemed to be called Bryce. Hals, what are you doing here? Bryce clasped the staff in his hand and frowned. In the face of foreign enemies, Slytherin College is still very united. Although Malfoy usually looks arrogant, there are still many little wizards who are willing to stand up and defend Malfoy, and a group of people vaguely surround Yvonne. Up the posture. Gryffindor's righteous little lions, not to mention, stood behind Yvonne one after another. Both of them drew out their staff, even though these beginner magic may not be effective yet. Yvonne shook his head, raised his hand to stop Ron who was about to roll up his sleeve, and said to Bryce. I'm here to help Malfoy lift the petrification curse. I believe you can clearly see the situation just now. Malfoy picked the matter first. Bryce seemed to hesitate, but after thinking about it, he signaled everyone to leave. Yvonne also solved the petrification curse in Malfoy as he said. Malfoy had just experienced the ups and downs, his calves were still trembling, but in order not to lose face in front of everyone, he climbed up from the ground rigidly. Yu reading www.yuyugonshu.com sternly directed at Yvonne shouted. How dare you cast a spell on me? You are done, Halls. Really? Yvonne looked at Draco Malfoy. What if you tell the professor about your stealing of Neville's crystal ball and flying privately? Yvonne approached Malfoy step by step, and his tone suddenly became serious. I heard that Filch likes to take disobedient children to his office most, and then tie their hands with chains and hang them from the ceiling, and then do strange things with whips and sticks. Malfoy was frightened for a while, because there was indeed such a rumor among the senior students in the school. Malfoy even forgot that if this was true, Yvonne who violated the school rules would have to enjoy the same treatment as him. Yvonne was ready to make persistent efforts when he saw the effect was good, but before he could speak, he heard Madame Hodge's voice behind him. You guys, how dare you guys? Mrs. Hodge, who rushed back in time after sending Neville to the infirmary, saw Malfoy who fell from the sky halfway down the road, and now saw Gryffindor and the little wizards of Slytherin College fighting with each other. Looks like, suddenly angry. Especially Harry, who was holding the crystal ball, just came down from the sky on a broomstick with a blank face, which made Mrs. Hodge even more angry. Yvonne reluctantly covered his face with his hands. He hadn't even calculated that Madame Hodge would come back at this point. He still wanted to have a good talk with Malfoy. I'm afraid this is the end. Thinking about it carefully, Yvonne found that it seemed that he had pitted himself. If he hadn't saved Neville with the levitating charm before, Mrs. Hodge would still be worried about Neville in the medical room. Chapter 17, Am I Right? Malfoy? Who can tell me what happened here? Mrs. Hodge looked around the little wizards, and then turned her attention to Malfoy and Harry. Harry and Malfoy both turned pale in fright, and Yvonne was the first to answer. Mrs. Hodge, as you can see, they are just practicing flying skills. A tangled color flashed across Malfoy's face, and he opened his mouth to tell the story of Ivan's attack on him with the petrification spell, but in the end he closed his mouth and did not refute it. After all, Malfoy understood that if he said it, Yvonne would definitely steal the Neville crystal ball and provoked him. Which of the two punishments is heavier, Malfoy still knew clearly in his heart. In order to avoid going to the confinement room and being lifted by Filch, Malfoy reluctantly accepted that he and Harry were friendly to practice flying together. But Malfoy would never allow the annoying Yvonne to stay out of the matter, even when he spoke. Yes, but it was not just the two of us who flew just now. While talking, Malfoy raised his eyebrows at Yvonne. The threatening expression on his face was obvious. Mrs. Hodge also shifted her attention from Malfoy and Harry to Yvonne. Okay, I admit. Yvonne shrugged indifferently, and his heart was filled with the character of the bear kid who had been spitting out the Malfolk. Yvonne and Malfoy glanced at each other uncomfortably, but the two sides still faintly reached an agreement in the intersection of their eyes, without revealing the truth to each other, a temporary truce. Malfoy was frightened by the punishment Yvonne said, and Yvonne was worried about being drawn to patrol the Forbidden Forest. With Ivan's current small body, he is not ready to take this risk. Harry, who had been watching, had a dazed expression on his face. Shouldn't it be Malfoy who took Neville's crystal ball and then took it back by himself? When did he practice flying friendly with Yvonne and Malfoy? But under the frequent hints that suggested Ivan's eyes, Harry still wisely chose to shut up. I should have said before I want to leave, no one is allowed to fly a broomstick until I come back. Hearing that 3 students were flying privately while they were not there, Mrs. Hodge was very angry for a while. Navi has just been taken to the hospital by her, what if there is another accident? I'm sorry, Professor. Yvonne first apologized politely, and then said immediately. But I think no little wizard can resist the temptation to fly freely on a broomstick. Who doesn't want to be a glorious Quidditch after graduation to win glory for the country? As for Malfoy and Neville, it was just an accident. Fortunately, our levitation charm worked well, and no one was injured. Yvonne talked endlessly about his love for Quidditch, only to say that he was going to become a Quidditch champion in the future. Mrs. Hodge's face looks better. As a flight class professor, Mrs. Hodge is also a fan of flying and Quidditch, so she can naturally understand the desire. Even so, you must pay the price for violating school regulations. Even though she was not as angry as she was at the beginning, Mrs. Hodge put down her face, thinking about how to punish these troublemakers, but was interrupted by Professor McGonagall who arrived in time. Mrs. Hodge, can you stop first? I might want to borrow Mr. Potter from you. Of course. Madam Hodge was a little surprised at first, then nodded quickly. Mrs. Hodge didn't see the process of Harry's flight just now. She thought it was Harry who made other mistakes and was found by Professor McGonagall, so it was simple to take Harry's flying class privately on the broomstick. Said it. Professor McGonagall just nodded, and then motioned to Harry to follow him. There was a paste in Harry's head, and he still didn't know what happened. He could only follow Professor McGonagall in fear. After Madam Hodge watched the two leave, she turned around and realized that there was still someone to deal with. Yvonne, Malfoy, your actions will deduct 5 points for your respective colleges, and then continue to class. Ivan's face turned bitter, and he didn't care about being deducted points. In the past few days, just answering questions in class, Yvonne had won 10 points for the academy, and a 5-point deduction would not make anyone blame him. But Yvonne felt a little painful when I continued to take the flight class. He secretly prayed that the class would end soon, or would I just wear it for help? Yvonne would have to pretend to be holding a broomstick in a flying posture, while trying to reduce the sense of presence and fish quietly. However, things went counterproductive. Due to the frequent situation in the previous flight class, Mrs. Hodge didn't dare to let these little wizards fly around. She prepared to come one by one. Malfoy gave Yvonne the unfortunate platoon. In the first place. Yvonne looked at the flying broomstick in his hand. Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com couldn't help sighing, and couldn't help but regret it. He had known that he had a bad flying skills. Now being trapped by Malfoy, he wants to say that he can't fly. Yvonne tried helplessly, this time the flying broom gave Yvonne a little bit of face, and under the control, he flew staggeringly. Despite this, Yvonne was very happy to experience flying for the first time. After a little acceleration, he felt the cold and stern wind echoing in his ears. The surrounding roof tiles flew by one. This feeling of freedom is far more than flying by plane. It's wonderful. After flying for a while, Yvonne landed smoothly. Madame Hodge pursed her lips, obviously not too satisfied. After all, Mrs. Hodge held high hopes for Ivan's previous performance. How come she flies and shakes now? Ivan had to cough a clear cough, covering his embarrassment. Ahem, Professor, I think this broomstick may be too old, it's a bit unstable when flying, I used to fly pretty well. Malfoy was grinning and snickering. He didn't expect that Ivan's flying skills were so bad. No wonder he had been on the ground before and didn't fly up like Harry. But unexpectedly, Ivan said suddenly. You mean? Malfoy? How else would you suddenly fall from under the broom? Malfoy, who was snickering, couldn't laugh anymore, so he had to look at Ivan bitterly, and it took him a long time to hold back a word. Of course, I also think there may be a problem with these broomsticks. How else can he say? Slap yourself in the face? Malfoy said that he was also very desperate. In order not to be punished, the truth cannot be told, or else it can be said that he fell because of his poor skills. Chapter 18, Rejected Duel. The flight class of the afternoon passed quickly in Ivan's entanglement. Fortunately, everything went smoothly. Ivan was the first student to complete the flight training. Ivan also took special care of Malfoy, and carefully told him to be careful when flying, and don't fall from the sky again. Mrs. Hodge in the distance saw Ivan's performance in her eyes, and her evaluation of Ivan improved a little bit in her heart. Gryffindor and the little wizards of Slytherin have never dealt with it. In her opinion, it is rare for Ivan to put aside the prejudice in her heart and care about Malfoy so much. And Malfoy was so angry that he threatened to show everyone a difficult flying maneuver to prove his skills, but it was a pity that Mrs. Hodge stopped him in time. After all, Malfoy has a precedent for falling. Mrs. Hodge is still a little worried about his accident, and she doesn't even allow Malfoy to fly on a broomstick during this class. Ding, the flight class is over, this comprehensive class evaluation, excellent. Evaluator, Rolanda Hodge. Reward, academic points *10. Ivan, who was walking in the corridor, was finally relieved when he saw the final class evaluation given. Even if the bear boy Malfoy made trouble, he still achieved his expected goal. Relatively speaking, Ron and Hermione are not in a good mood. Both are worried about Harry, who was taken away by Professor McGonagall. Especially Hermione, who hasn't calmed down until now, couldn't help but ran up to Ivan after the get out of class, and said babblingly. I think we should tell Professor McGonagall and Mrs. Hodge. Otherwise, what if Harry is fired? Ivan stopped and looked at Hermione. No, Professor McGonagall won't fire Harry because of this trivial matter. Maybe it's because Harry flew well just now, so Professor McGonagall intends to let Harry join the Quidditch team. If you want to join the Quidditch team, you need to be at least the 2nd grade. Hermione corrected Ivan made a mistake in his words. There are special cases for everything, and not a little wizard can fly as well as Harry when he was a beginner. Ivan smiled. Hermione thought for a while. It seemed that there was such a possibility. Ron also brightened up and discussed with them the possibility of Harry entering the Quidditch team. If Harry can make it, Ron thinks he can also. By the time the trio arrived at the auditorium to have dinner, Harry had already been sitting there. Before they had passed, Harry had already greeted him and couldn't wait to give Professor McGonagall a spotter. Said it. Even though Ivan had vaccinated the two of them in advance, they were still very surprised, especially Ron, who was extremely excited. Harry, I didn't expect you to actually join the Quidditch team. You may be the youngest seeker ever at Hogwarts. I mean, they still lack manpower. For example, a batsman or a goalkeeper. Yes. Ron looked at Harry expectantly, hoping to hear some good news. No, I heard Wood say that there is enough manpower. Harry shook his head awkwardly. He didn't understand why Ron could be so excited. He only heard about Quidditch matches today. He didn't know exactly what it was. What's going on? By the way, Ivan, what happened in the flight class today? Harry turned to look at Ivan depressed. Didn't Malfoy take Neville's crystal ball? Then I chased it. When did we train with Malfoy? When he was taken away by Professor McGonagall before, Harry was almost terrified. He even thought he was going to be expelled from Hogwarts and returned to the dirty and cramped cupboard of his uncle's house. Fortunately, the situation is not as bad as he thought. Ivan didn't mean to conceal, he used the petrification curse to attack Malfoy and told him something ugly. If I'm exposing Malfoy, I'll have to be locked up with him. Anyway, he's learned enough, right? Ivan spread his hands. Ron also added enthusiasm and talked about Malfoy's flight restriction by Ivan Pitt in flight class. Harry's depression suddenly disappeared and he was amused to laugh. Only Hermione still cares about everyone's violation of school rules. Seeing Ivan and the others are chatting happily, she turned around and left angrily. Ivan thought for a while and still didn't say anything to keep her. Hermione's temperament was about to change. Of course, it's not that it's bad to follow the rules, but sometimes it's too rigid to get yourself completely into this frame without leaving any room. Just like in the original book, Malfoy, who caused trouble in flight lessons, was basically unpunished. This is certainly due to Harry's bad luck, and Professor McGonagall did not give him a chance to explain, but even if Harry explained the reason clearly, Professor McGonagall probably deducted the credits of the two people, which is fundamental to Malfoy. There is no loss. At least now Malfoy is very scared. I believe he will not dare to do things again in a short time. UU reading www.uuganshu.com. It's a pity that the face slap came faster than Yvonne expected. Before Yvonne had finished eating, Malfoy brought Crabbe and Gore to find the difference. Perhaps because of the two attendants, Malfoy returned to his original arrogant appearance, but when he saw Yvonne, his teeth were itchy with hatred. Potter, are you eating your last meal? Tomorrow you are going to bid farewell to your Muggle world, right? Malfoy sneered loudly. Yvonne and Harry didn't do anything when they heard that, instead they looked at Malfoy like a fool. Ron even thought that Malfoy's expression would be funny if Harry became a seeker. The indifferent attitude of Yvonne and others made Malfoy a little uneasy, but he gritted his teeth and said what he should say. Halls, if you have the courage, come to the prize showroom tonight, I will fight you. However, what Malfoy didn't expect was that Yvonne shook his head resolutely. Don't go. What a joke, he is still going to the forbidden area to receive the rewards from the system tonight, so what effort is there to play a duel game with Malfoy? Not to mention that in the impression that Yvonne still had, Malfoy was planning to release the pigeons this time, and then notified Filch to arrest people. He would go to this kind of thing if he was stupid. Hals, are you scared? Malfoy sneered. I'm not interested in a duel with the defeated opponent. It's a waste of time. Yvonne squinted at Malfoy for a while, and said with a look of no interest in weak chickens. When you learn more advanced magic, come back, or you fall down again, but no one will save you. Chapter 19, Explore the Restricted Book Zone. Yvonne said, suddenly as if he had remembered something, he spoke again. Also, Malfoy, you still owe Hermione a thank you, don't forget. Hals. That was your despicable attack on me. Malfoy drew out his wand and pointed it at Yvonne, his white cheeks flushed red. Even if Malfoy fell from the sky and fell to his death, and was locked up in Azkaban, I would never thank a Muggle. Crabbe and Gore also drew out their magic wands, but they responded to them with the surprised look of many Gryffindors. This reminded the three of them that this is Gryffindor's long table. Let's do it here. They only have to be beaten. Hearing the three words Muggle seed, Yvonne frowned involuntarily, and Ron even jumped up and shouted. Malfoy. We accept your challenge. I must teach you a lesson tonight. Okay, then I'll wait tonight. Malfoy raised his eyebrows, smiled and turned away. Duel, what is a duel? Do two people stab each other with swords? When Malfoy left, Harry asked, confused. Of course not, how could we be as stupid as those Muggles? Ron proudly said the rules he knew. Well, you first need to stand opposite each other, and then bow to the opponent. The two sides hold up their wands and use magic to perform a glorious duel. If one party dies, the assistant must connect it. It will not be over until one party falls. Ron got more and more excited as he talked about it. It was more fun to do duels than boringly reading books in the classroom every day. Besides, he had already seen Malfoy upset. Dead. Harry swallowed. Ron is too exaggerated. It was a regular wizard duel. At best, we use some magic such as disarming curses and leg-locking curses, sometimes not as useful as fists. Yvonne shook his head and explained to Harry. Yvonne, are you going to go tonight? Ron expected. No, I said before, there's still business tonight, but I don't have time to pay attention to Malfoy. Yvonne shook his head. In Ivan's opinion, this kind of silly face-to-face magical duel with wands was too stupid. It doesn't fit his mind as a wizard at all. It's not as interesting as watching a fencing performance, at least it has some ornamental. In view of Ron and Harry's restless temperament, Yvonne kindly reminded them. It's still a matter of two to say whether Malfoy will come tonight, maybe he just wants to fool us over, and then let Filch come over and catch us all. Impossible. Ron and Harry looked at each other, thinking that Malfoy shouldn't be so shameless, this is an honorable wizard duel. Seeing the look of Harry and Ron, Yvonne knew that he couldn't persuade them. After sighing, Yvonne was no longer admonishing, and turned up the teach you fast flight on the table. Anyway, according to his memory, the actions of Harry and others tonight should have been shocking, but they could learn more about the Sorcerer's Stone. Even if there is an accident, Dumbledore will be responsible for the finishing touches, and the principal will not let his appointed savior have an accident. Ron, are we really going to a duel at Malfoy at night? What if Malfoy doesn't come at all, as Yvonne said? After eating, Harry, who returned to his bedroom with him, said worriedly to Ron. Of course we are going, this is a duel. Malfoy can't fail to come. If he arrives and finds we haven't gone, how ashamed of us. Ron desperately cheered Harry, after all, he just agreed. Down. But without Ivan, we are only two, how could we have beaten the three of Malfoy? Harry said. We can call Neville together, so there are 3 people. Ron thought for a while, and it seemed to make sense. Although Malfoy's 2 followers were a little stupid, they were much stronger than them, and they suffered a lot from fighting. Up. Neville. Harry opened his mouth, trying to say something, and then swallowed back after a while. Why does he suddenly feel more worried? Or else, 2 people will go for it. At midnight, in the Gryffindor lounge, Ivan put down the Teach You to Fly Fast in his hand. In order to avoid the embarrassment of the previous flight class, Ivan borrowed the books related to flight technique after the get out of class. After a few hours of reading, plus 1 flight class, the flight technique is almost close to the 2nd level. Level up. At this time, the bedroom was already empty. Harry and Ron had pulled Neville sneaking out 10 minutes ago. Ivan can only wish them good luck, but the 3-headed dog has no good temper. Seeing that the time was almost the same, Ivan crawled out of the cylinder-like passage. Looking back, the intersection of the passage had been automatically closed. The fat lady who is in charge of guarding the passage doesn't seem to be there, maybe she stopped by. Hogwarts at midnight was a bit more deserted than usual, and it was a little frighteningly quiet. The entire corridor was pitch black, and only the dim candle light that lit up every 10 meters made Ivan barely able to see the road ahead. UU reading www.uugonshu.com. Fortunately, in this wizard's world, ghosts are not terrifying. Ivan also chatted with some of them, so I didn't panic at all, just complaining about the rewards given by the system in my heart. This is too hardcore, the reward actually requires him to go to the forbidden book area to get. This is not systematic at all. Ivan went straight through the long corridor and encountered an annoying spiral staircase on the way to the restricted area. At night, these stairs seem to be skinnier than during the day, and there is no pattern at all. Sometimes when Ivan arrives, they suddenly turn to the other side. I don't know if I gave Ivan this kind of likes on purpose. The little wizards who came out to wander around in the middle of the night made it more difficult. Fortunately, Ivan's curse is not learned for nothing. Using the floating curse can make oneself float for a short time, relying on borrowing force to float to the place where you want to go, and using the petrified curse can block the connection between the stairs and the stairs, let they cannot move. With the help of a few hardly advanced spells, Ivan went very smoothly. There are a large number of portraits hung around the spiral staircase. A few old scholars with white beards watched Ivan jumping up and down with interest, and a few portraits greeted Ivan enthusiastically. After Ivan went downstairs, he responded politely one by one, and then turned from the auditorium to the way to the library. Areho cave open. Ivan opened the closed library door with the unlocking spell, closed it with his backhand for safety, and then waved his staff and used the fluorescent spell. Fluorescence flickering. The bright white light from the tip of the wand flashed by. After it stabilized, the light was already dimmed a lot, but it was enough for Ivan. Chapter 20, Origin of Blood. Ivan walked through the sea of books holding his magic wand, without the slightest intention of staying in the normal area, and walked straight to the restricted area. Advanced Transfiguration Guide, Ancient. Magic Veins. Contemplation peeping into your brain. Ivan's gaze flicked across the rows of bookshelves, and a large number of banned books whose names were quite high-end made Ivan greedy, and there were even books he had been longing for in dementia and occlumency. If possible, Ivan can't wait to use hundreds of SWIBA experience cards to watch here for 10 days and a half, and then his strength will rise. But in the end Ivan resisted the temptation, because he didn't have so many academic points to redeem, and he didn't forget what he was here for today. Following the sign number in the forbidden book zone, Ivan quickly found the 7th row and 12th column bookshelf, but it didn't seem to be any different here. A large number of magic books were neatly arranged, and the bookshelves were piled up full. Leave a little gap. Ivan was unwilling to try to find out something like the secret tunnel, but found nothing. Instead, he accidentally bumped a book of black magic on the ground. The book has no wind and automatically, as if you have your own consciousness. Pages are automatically turned up. After a few pages are turned, billowing black mist emerges from the pages of the book. You can faintly see a man's head with his mouth open, screaming loudly. What frightened Ivan was that he obviously didn't hear any sound, but his eardrums began to swell, and his brain gradually became dizzy, as if someone was actually yelling in front of him. The thick black fog gathered more and more, and the head seemed to burst out of the book for a while. Slap! Ivan closed the book abruptly and flattened his black head on the page. As the book was closed, the black fog disappeared. It's just a book, have you turned the sky upside down? Ivan rubbed his ears and gritted his teeth. It took a long time before Ivan dared to pick it up. The cover of the book reads The Decryption of Advanced Black Magic. The feel of the cover is obviously different from that of other books. It feels a bit like touching the skin. Isn't it human skin? A thought flashed in Ivan's mind, and Ivan suddenly felt a bit chilly. Thinking of the painful appearance of the man's head just now, it is really possible. Ivan glanced at the reward task in the system, and there was no change in the slightest, indicating that it had nothing to do with the reward, so he really accidentally touched it. Ivan had to shove the cutting-edge black magic decryption back in depression, planning to look for the missing mechanism, and suddenly noticed that the bookshelf in front of him seemed to be a little different from just now. 1 2 3 4 5 6. Every bookshelf in the Forbidden Book Zone is exactly the same. Books are divided into 6 rows and 7 columns according to their type. However, Ivan keenly noticed that the 12th column of bookshelf cabinets was obviously missing by one. What makes Ivan feel a little awkward is that there is obviously a missing cabinet, but the entire column of bookshelves is still neat and tidy, as if the space here has been distorted. Someone used the confusion curse here? Hit one of the cabinets. Ivan squinted his eyes. He had checked this bookshelf many times just now. It was only possible that someone had set a confusion curse here, which affected his judgment, and then happened to be caught by the screaming sound just now. The confusion curse was broken. Even if he knew where the anomaly was, Ivan was a little bit blind. After reading basic charm principles, he might be able to judge that this is a kind of hidden object curse, but he knows too little magic. None of them can come in handy. Ivan had to use his brain to try to recall the books he had read, and accidentally remembered a magic that Snape used in the original book. Apparitium, emergency manifestation. Ivan tried to put his wand on the bookshelf, and whispered the manifestation curse. The entire bookshelf began to shake slightly, and a trace was cracked in the middle of the 12th column of bookshelves. After a while, it suddenly expanded, and a new bookcase appeared in front of Ivan's eyes. The hidden bookcase looks no different from the others. They are filled with thick books. Ivan reached out and scanned these books one by one. When the last one was encountered, the system's prompt sound was truthful. Sounded. Ding, the reward has been issued. Ivan's mouth twitched, but his heart was already madly complaining. That's how rewards are distributed? If it wasn't for his luck, if it wasn't for his wit, God knows how long it will take. This broken system is not caring at all. Ivan can't help but feel sad when thinking about what other people's homes want and what kind of caring system. As a host, it's really hard for him. Even though thinking about this, Ivan was excited to pull the book out of the shelf. The cover of the book was slightly rough, with a few words Origin of Blood printed on it, and the paper pages were slightly yellowed for long-term preservation. As far as the magic book is concerned, the age can be seen. Ivan discovered that this was another magic book that was not mentioned in the original work. Since this was a reward given by the system, Ivan looked through it directly. After reading a few pictures, Ivan was disappointed to find that The Origin of Blood was not a magic book that recorded powerful spells in his imagination. On the contrary, reading www.yuyuganshu.com was a bit like a history book, and it recorded before the Wizarding War. History. At that time, the wizards did not dominate the entire magical world like they do now, and they were even able to enslave the house elves, which are magical creatures with strong ability to cast spells as adults. On the contrary, compared to these magical creatures that are born with powerful power, human wizards are really weak and pitiful. It can only be said that they rely on their number advantages to occupy a place in the magical world. Fortunately, humans have always been creatures that refuse to admit defeat. Some wizards choose to specialize in magic and create more powerful spells to enhance their strength. Others focus their attention on quick methods, such as taking the power of those powerful magical creatures. Some wizards have succeeded and their strength has been amazingly improved. What is even more terrifying is that the power of this bloodline can continue, so that the descendants of these wizards can also gain power. Although the power of the bloodline may be gradually weakened due to iteration, this discovery is enough to make more wizards crazy. However, the risk of blood fusion is extremely high. Except for a few successful people, most wizards died miserably during the process of experimentation and fusion. Some lucky losers survived, but at the price they became monsters and cursed for generations. Such as werewolves, vampires, etc. There are even wizards who choose to cultivate more powerful and more suitable magical creatures to carry out blood fusion experiments to enhance their power. This reminds Ivan of the basilisk sleeping in the secret room and the eight-eyed giant spider in the Forbidden Forest. The most maddening thing is that some wizards find ways to choose the less unacceptable magical creatures and establish super friendship relationships, hoping that their offspring can continue the blood of the other party. Chapter 21, Put down your axe first, we have something to say. Among the many recorded successes, Ivan even saw the Dumbledore family, which surprised him somewhat. Then, Ivan remembered Dumbledore's Phoenix Fox and the rumors about Dumbledore's family in Greenwood's crimes. Whenever a member of the Dumbledore family urgently needs help, the Phoenix will come. Ivan wondered if it was related to their fusion of Phoenix blood. Of course, according to the book's records, the Dumbledore family is a relatively moderate group, and even obtained the consent of the other party before conducting the fusion experiment. This is probably the reason why the relationship between the Phoenix and the Dumbledore family is so close. Well? Why did I break it here? Ivan was reading the book with enthusiasm, but when the fusion method was described at the end of the book, he suddenly disconnected, as if several pages were forcibly torn off in the middle. The rest are content that is not nutritious. When Ivan was confused that the so-called reward was just some information, the system prompt sounded again. The origin of blood has been read, and the challenge task is activated. Challenge task: defeat, or kill, giant monsters. Reward: blood vessel fusion potion formula. Challenge mission. Ivan was stunned. He always thought this was a learning system, but he didn't expect that there would be a setting for killing monsters. Ivan is even more curious about who actually hid this book here, and even set up a confusing curse and special hidden magic in the forbidden book area. Dumbledore was the first to think of Ivan, the greatest white wizard of this century, who has the authority and reason to hide origin of blood. After all, blood fusion is extremely dangerous. Therefore, wizards who die are definitely dozens of times more alive. This terrifying death rate prevents such wizards with special blood from becoming the mainstream of wizards. In addition, James Potter, Sirius, and others are also possible. After all, hiding some important items is in line with their style. There is also Tom Marvolo Riddle, who once stayed at Hogwarts, or Voldemort. Various guesses flashed through Ivan's mind one by one, but Ivan didn't stay here any longer. There were too many things to digest in his brain tonight, and even when faced with a large number of banned books, Ivan didn't have the thought of reading. On the way back, Ivan's attention was on the newly activated challenge task. Seeing that the target is the troll, Ivan has a headache, but he will not despise the troll just because Harry and Ron defeated it in the original book. They were able to win, and coincidence factors accounted for a large proportion. If it hadn't been for the halo of Harry's savior, it would have been cold when the professors arrived. Judging from the information obtained by Ivan from reading books, trolls are not easy to deal with. They are huge, powerful, and have certain resistance to magic. Even an adult wizard must be careful when confronting them. Handle. Ivan sighed. If it hadn't been learned from the origin of blood that fusion of the blood of magical creatures could improve magical talents, he wouldn't want to face such monsters in the first grade. Ivan walked through the silent castle, and the smoothness of the previous arrival made Ivan more or less vigilant. However, not long after walking out of a secret road, a blue, fast-traveling gloom suddenly collided with Ivan. Just as if his whole body was immersed in ice water, Ivan shuddered all over, and turned his head to look over and found that it was an ugly ghost with a shabby hat. Peppy Ghost. Peppy Ghost was even more excited, clapping his hands, and shouting in his throat. Look, see what I found? Another new student, come on. There is one more here. All petrification. Ivan's backhand was a petrification spell. The blue-grey light accurately hit Peepigui's chest, but the latter was only repelled a little, and he smiled happily. Ha ha ha, useless, you can't hurt me. Pippi triumphantly circled Ivan, seeming to want to drag Ivan here. Seeing that ordinary magic is useless for Pippi, Ivan is not discouraged, because the ghost is not immune to all magic, and it happens that he has a trick that specializes in spirit. Fear is coming. Just as Pippi was arrogantly making faces in front of Ivan, a purple light shot from the top of Ivan's wand, and Pippi immediately changed his face and screamed into a classroom in the distance. Ivan, who was far away, could still hear Peepigui's sharp yelling. No, Barrow, let me go, I swear I didn't do anything bad. And Nick, put down your axe first, we have something to say. Seeing Pippi's reaction, Ivan nodded in satisfaction, and called up the magic bar of the system, and found that the fear curse had unknowingly reached the second level in these days. No wonder the effect was so good. After dealing with the annoying Pi Piggy, there was another rush of footsteps in the distance. Then Ivan remembered that Pi Piggy had previously said that he had found a newborn again www.ndlenovel.com waiting for ye. It was too late when they were about to re-enter the underpass to evade, and Harry, Ron, Hermione and Neville rushed out across from Ivan. Harry and the others didn't expect to meet Ivan here, but it was obviously not the time to talk about this. Harry was just stunned for less than a second, and took the lead in pulling Ivan's arm and running together. Ivan, run! No time to explain, Filch is behind. Ivan didn't even finish saying a few words about the secret road behind, he was dragged into another aisle by Harry, and had to run with him. Ivan faintly felt that this scene seemed a bit familiar as he ran, until Harry took the lead and stepped into the forbidden corridor on the 4th floor that Ivan realized something was wrong. Quick, come in, Filch is coming. Harry and Neville pulled in Ivan, who didn't want to come in. Hermione closed the door. It was rare for Ron not to fish. He locked the door hard. So Filch won't be able to come in. Harry breathed a sigh of relief. Yeah, it's just that we can't get out anymore. Ivan muttered to himself while looking at the locked door, and then sighed as he looked deep in the corridor. If you want me to say, it's better to go out and face Filch. Harry didn't understand Ivan's meaning, but soon he felt something sticky on his shoulders. He turned his head and looked at him and found that 3 huge heads were looking at him, and there was a foul smell from his open mouth. From time to time, yellow muddy saliva fell from the edge of his big mouth, and some even splashed on his clothes. In the next second, Hermione and the others also saw the 3-headed dog, and the cry of fear suddenly tore the silence of the night. Chapter 22, which was the one who locked the door. Harry's position happened to be at the back of the crowd. Facing the huge mouth of the abyss that suddenly struck, Harry was a little dazed for a while. The foul smell sprayed on his face, making Harry almost nauseous. Just as desperation spread throughout his body, Ivan's voice suddenly rang in Harry's ears. There are so many obstacles. A series of invisible barriers blocked the 3-headed dog's ferocious heads in mid-air, but the next second, the barrier constructed by Ivan's magical powers was torn and shattered by another big mouth with fangs. Fortunately, in just 1 second of effort, Harry had reflected in time and barely escaped. But after Ron yelled to run fast, the whole person had already swooped on the door, and after pulling hard with both hands a few times, he realized that the door had been locked. Which locked the door? Ron said desperately. Ivan, who temporarily restrained the 3-headed dog with a coma spell and a petrification spell, couldn't help but roll his eyes. Didn't you lock the door yourself? Ron was panicked, even suspecting that he might die here. Hermione pushed it away and put the wand on the door lock. Allaho cave is open. Hermione spelled the door and broke the door lock violently. A group of 5 people escaped as quickly as possible, and then closed the door back in time before the 3-headed dog Norway came out. After was far away, listening to the faintly banging and roaring in the distance, the few people who had escaped from the dead were relieved, especially Ivan who was caught in somehow. When he was pinning the 3-headed dog Norway, Ivan found that his magic level was too low and its effect was limited. When the coma curse was applied, it would affect the actions of the 3-headed dog at all. If Hermione opens the door later, he might get a lunchbox. After all, in such a small space, there is not even a place to hide. This also made Ivan deeply understand his weakness. It may be easy to deal with a first-grade wizard like Malfoy, but he doesn't even have the ability to struggle in the face of real danger. That monster won't hit the door and run out, right? Ron glanced at the door that hadn't stopped behind him, then complained again. No, this should be a special door, otherwise it would have been broken. Ivan explained. How could Professor Dumbledore keep such a monster in the castle? Harry was also a little frightened. He had never thought that he would meet such a terrifying thing at Hogwarts, and he would almost be eaten by it. Hermione reminded her angrily. I think you should remember that when you first entered school, Dumbledore told us that we shouldn't come here. If we didn't come out in the middle of the night in violation of school regulations, we wouldn't rush into this place in a panic. Maybe it was because she had just escaped from the dead. Hermione's tone was sharper than usual. Harry and Ron knew when they heard that Hermione was going to talk about it again, and Neville almost cried. Who would have thought that after her vent, Hermione did not intend to sue? Instead, she revealed the fact that she saw a trapdoor under the 3-headed dog before, and she suspected that the 3-headed dog was guarding something. Guess. But before leaving, Hermione still warned Harry and the others that no matter what was there, it had nothing to do with them. This should be something Professor Dumbledore had to consider. Hermione's attitude made Harry and the others unpredictable, but fortunately, Hermione would probably not tell Professor McGonagall about their violation of school rules tonight. I didn't expect Malfoy to be so insidious. He must have told Filch what we were in the trophy showroom. Ron was still a bit angry when he returned to the bedroom, threatening to beat Malfoy tomorrow. Ivan, I knew we should have listened to you. Harry said embarrassedly. After all, Ivan had already mentioned this possibility to them in the afternoon. Forget it. Ivan waved his hand and said that he didn't care. After all, he had never expected Harry and Ron to stay in the dormitory without the temptation. It was just his luck to hit him halfway. By the way, Ivan, why were you in the corridor just now? Harry asked curiously. I haven't come to you yet. Ivan said casually. He can't always say that he sneaked into the forbidden book zone to read in the middle of the night, right? Harry and the others became even more ashamed, but before this emotion persisted for a few minutes, they were thrown aside by a few people, and they discussed the trapdoor guarded by the 3-headed dog, guessing what was hidden inside. Finally, Harry told about the fact that he had taken out a package from Gringotts with Hagrid before school started. Ivan was not involved. The challenge task just activated was enough for him to have a headache. He had no interest in interfering with Dumbledore's layout. The only thing to be thankful for is that there is still some time before Halloween, when the monsters are infested, and he still has some time to prepare. In the next week or two, Ivan worked hard to improve his strength, while the rest of the time was frantically searching for books about trolls in the library. Detailed explanation of common magical creatures. Guide to the domestication of dangerous monsters. On the possibility of hybridization between giants and giants. Even the walk with giant monsters was turned over by Ivan. UU reading www.uugonshu.com. Yes, the author of this book is Guydrol Lockhart, who will replace Kino in the next semester to teach the Defense Against the Dark Arts class. Although Yvonne knew Lockhart was a liar who could only forget the curse, this did not hinder the authenticity and professionalism of the content of the book, which is why he could find it in the Hogwarts library. To be honest, after seeing Lockhart's iconic smile with white teeth on the cover, Yvonne didn't want to open it. But who made the contents of the first few books unreliable? The detailed explanation of common magical creatures only mentions that giant monsters have no medicinal value, and there is nothing delicious from the brain to the torso after being put in the pot. The description of trolls in the Guide to the Taming of Dangerous Monsters is that wizards can usually use more powerful power to make them succumb. Isn't this trademark nonsense? If he has the strength to defeat the trolls, what else would he do here to flip the book? The book on the possibility of hybridization between giants and giants even made Ivan's eyes hot with an academic approach with both illustrations and texts. Instead, it is a biographical method in Walking with Giant Monsters, which gives a detailed introduction to the habits and weaknesses of the giant monster. For example, trolls usually have low IQs, have a large appetite, and eat everything, so if you want to deal with it, placing bait is a more correct choice. Trolls have a high probability of eating the bait. There is also the giant monster's small beam-like head and huge body, which makes the overall stability weak. If you use a powerful spell to hit the giant monster's leg, it may break the balance and knock the giant monster down. A few more steps before being eaten. Finally, the head of the troll itself is also a weakness, much more fragile than other parts of the body. If it is hit by gravity, it is likely to go into a coma directly. Chapter 23, I can still get 1 point in the skin. Ivan, who finished reading the book, smashed his mouth. I don't know which master was so unlucky. When he told his own experience, Lockhart spotted him. Can tell in such detail, it is obvious that he has been in close contact with the smelly monster. Ivan closed the book and put it back in place. Even if he knew the weakness of the troll, he still had to make various preparations. For example, the improvement of potions, or the learning of some more powerful magic, in short, is that his grade point is missing. The only way to get grade points is to answer the professor's questions in each class, except for the usual class. But Ivan soon discovered that it is not so easy to be a good student. Even answering questions needs competition these days. Regardless of the course, as long as the professor on the stage asks a question, our know-it-all lady will always raise her hand high for the first time, and then quickly and accurately speak the answer with the professor's permission. After Ivan joined the ranks of answering questions, the class became a battlefield for two people, and two arms raised high in each class. And Hermione seemed to be having fun too, and she worked harder. She often stayed in the library with Ivan until the door was closed and the lights went out before returning to the bedroom. Ivan just wanted to cry without tears, he just wanted to earn some school points, but Hermione's gain was directly reduced by more than half. Ivan couldn't bear it, so he had to use some special methods. Disarming Curse and Obstacle Curse are what we will focus on next, and they will also be one of the most frequently used spells in the future. In the spell class, Professor Flitwick, the short fairy, is standing on a stool, spreading common magic knowledge for a group of little wizards, and flicking a magic wand to demonstrate to everyone from time to time. Has taught spell lessons for more than 10 years. Professor Flitwick's teaching experience is very rich, and it will not be long before the learning emotions of the little wizards are stimulated. Okay, then does anyone know what the disarming spell is? What does it do? Professor Flitwick looked at the students in the audience and asked. Hermione took the lead in raising her arms, and at the same time she turned her head and glanced at Ivan. Hermione was still very concerned about the only threatening competitor in class. However, Ivan stood up directly in Hermione's surprised eyes and said to Professor Flitwick. The spell of the disarming spell is Professor Expelliarmus, except your weapon. The effect is to deprive the opponent's wand after hitting the opponent. At the same time, the disarming spell also has a certain impact. The knockback effect and the level of the caster and the difference between the magic power of both parties related. Professor Flitwick, who was standing on the stool, was just about to ask Hermione a question, but he didn't expect that Ivan suddenly stood up and crackled and said a big deal. He was a little dazed for a while. Good point, Gryffindor adds 2 points. Professor Flitwick quickly reacted, but Ivan's behavior of rushing to answer was somewhat bad, so Professor Flitwick reminded him again. Also, Mr. Halls, I think you'd better raise your hand before answering the question next time. Okay, Professor. Ivan glanced at the rewards in the system column and sat down satisfactorily. Ivan's well-behaved attitude made Professor Flitwick nod, thinking that Ivan might just love learning, so he cleared his throat and continued. Next is another question, Obstacle Curse. Before Professor Flitwick could finish speaking, Ivan stood up again. The spell of the obstacle spell is Impedimenta, there are many obstacles. The effect is to create a magical barrier for blocking offensives in a single direction. The advantage is that it can stack multiple at the same time, which has a stronger defensive effect. The disadvantage is that it cannot defend against other directions. Attack. Am I right? Professor. Yvonne smiled obediently at Professor Flitwick. Hermione's eyes widened and looked at Yvonne blankly. This time it was over without even having time to raise her hand. The rest of the little wizards shivered under the aura of Ivan's swiba, just answering a question. As for the need to grab it. Too cruel. Yes. Professor Flitwick spit out a word difficultly, waved to Yvonne to sit down, this time he didn't even add points. Yvonne doesn't care either. The system's bonus rules only need to be approved by the professor. Let's move on to the next question. Professor Flitwick cleared his throat, glanced over Yvonne, and quickly turned to speak. Forget it, I'll teach this lesson myself. After learning how to answer in class, Ivan's speed at obtaining grade points suddenly became a lot faster. After all, although Hermione is a schoolmaster and smart, the little witch's face is still relatively thin, and she can't do what Yvonne is. So operation. It's just that every time I saw Ivan's delicate little face was always bulging. At the beginning, he reminded Yvonne that it was wrong to answer in class and that they should have a fair competition. Of course, Yvonne shook his head resolutely. What kind of jokes are you joking? Can the matter of rushing to answer among the masters be called robbing? Anyway, it did not violate the Hogwarts school rules. UU reading www.uugonshu.com. It is estimated that when the Big Four of Hogwarts founding school were drawing up school regulations, they did not expect that there would be someone who could love learning so much. Yvonne felt that even if they knew, they would definitely leave tears of comfort in the coffin. Hermione was dumbfounded by Yvonne, especially since Yvonne used his previous experience of being deducted 5 points in flight lessons. Now out of guilt, he wants to make up for it 10 times 100 times. There is nothing to say. While Yvonne was happy, the professors of various subjects had headaches. More importantly, they didn't know how to deal with Yvonne. They have seen little wizards making trouble, but it was the first time that they rushed to answer in class. In addition, Yvonne was correct and accurate every time he answered, and he admitted his mistakes sincerely after answering, which caused professors of various subjects to be embarrassed to scold Yvonne just a few words. Yvonne, who had tasted the sweetness, then extended his deadly claws to the last Fortress Potions class, intending to gradually figure out Professor Snape's bottom line. Snape, who had always favored Slytherin and was hostile to Gryffindor, was not so good at talking. He personally gave Yvonne a warning when get out of class was over. If he saw Yvonne next time, he would stand up and answer questions without consent. He deducted all the academy points Yvonne earned in Beak. But as soon as Snape walked with his forefoot, the system prompt sounded as expected. Ding, the potions course is over. This comprehensive class evaluation, satisfactory, excellent. Evaluator, Severus Snape. Reward, academic points *10. Dead Sundara. Yvonne couldn't help but spit out, and then touched his chin thoughtfully. He seemed, probably, like, you can still skin a little bit more? Chapter 23, I can still peel one more point. Yvonne, who finished reading the book, smashed his mouth. I don't know which master was so unlucky. When he told his own experience, Lockhart spotted him. Can tell in such detail, it is obvious that he has been in close contact with the smelly monster. Yvonne closed the book and put it back in place. Even if he knew the weakness of the troll, he still had to make various preparations. For example, the improvement of potions, or the learning of some more powerful magic, in short, is that his grade point is missing. The only way to get grade points is to answer the professor's questions in each class, except for the usual class. But Yvonne soon discovered that it is not so easy to be a good student. Even answering questions needs competition these days. Regardless of the course, as long as the professor on the stage asks a question, our know-it-all lady will always raise her hand high for the first time, and then quickly and accurately speak the answer with the professor's permission. After Yvonne joined the ranks of answering questions, the class became a battlefield for 2 people, and 2 arms raised high in each class. And Hermione seemed to be having fun too, and she worked harder. She often stayed in the library with Yvonne until the door was closed and the lights went out before returning to the bedroom. Yvonne just wanted to cry without tears, he just wanted to earn some school points, but Hermione's gain was directly reduced by more than half. Yvonne couldn't bear it, so he had to use some special methods. Disarming Curse and Obstacle Curse are what we will focus on next, and they will also be one of the most frequently used spells in the future. In the spell class, Professor Flitwick, the short fairy, is standing on a stool, spreading common magic knowledge for a group of little wizards, and flicking a magic wand to demonstrate to everyone from time to time. Has taught spell lessons for more than 10 years. Professor Flitwick's teaching experience is very rich, and it will not be long before the learning emotions of the little wizards are stimulated. Okay, then does anyone know what the disarming spell is? What does it do? Professor Flitwick looked at the students in the audience and asked. Hermione took the lead in raising her arms, and at the same time she turned her head and glanced at Yvonne. Hermione was still very concerned about the only threatening competitor in class. However, Yvonne stood up directly in Hermione's surprised eyes and said to Professor Flitwick. The spell of the disarming spell is Professor Expelliarmus, except your weapon. The effect is to deprive the opponent's wand after hitting the opponent. At the same time, the disarming spell also has a certain impact. The knockback effect and the level of the caster and the difference between the magic power of both parties related. Professor Flitwick, who was standing on the stool, was just about to ask Hermione a question, but he didn't expect that Yvonne suddenly stood up and crackled and said a big deal. He was a little dazed for a while. Good point, Gryffindor adds 2 points. Professor Flitwick quickly reacted, but Ivan's behavior of rushing to answer was somewhat bad, so Professor Flitwick reminded him again. Also, Mr. Halls, I think you'd better raise your hand before answering the question next time. Okay, Professor. Yvonne glanced at the rewards in the system column and sat down satisfactorily. Ivan's well-behaved attitude made Professor Flitwick nod, thinking that Yvonne might just love learning, so he cleared his throat and continued. Next is another question, obstacle curse. Before Professor Flitwick could finish speaking, Yvonne stood up again. The spell of the obstacle spell is impedimenta, there are many obstacles. The effect is to create a magical barrier for blocking offensives in a single direction. The advantage is that it can stack multiple at the same time, which has a stronger defensive effect. The disadvantage is that it cannot defend against other directions. Attack. Am I right? Professor. Yvonne smiled obediently at Professor Flitwick. Hermione's eyes widened and looked at Yvonne blankly. This time it was over without even having time to raise her hand. The rest of the little wizards shivered under the aura of Ivan's swiba, just answering a question. As for the need to grab it. Too cruel. Yes. Professor Flitwick spit out a word difficultly, waved to Yvonne to sit down, this time he didn't even add points. Yvonne doesn't care either. The system's bonus rules only need to be approved by the professor. Let's move on to the next question. Professor Flitwick cleared his throat, glanced over Yvonne, and quickly turned to speak. Forget it, I'll teach this lesson myself. After learning how to answer in class, Ivan's speed at obtaining grade points suddenly became a lot faster. After all, although Hermione is a schoolmaster and smart, the little witch's face is still relatively thin, and she can't do what Yvonne is. So operation. It's just that every time I saw Ivan's delicate little face was always bulging. At the beginning, he reminded Yvonne that it was wrong to answer in class and that they should have a fair competition. Of course, Yvonne shook his head resolutely. What kind of jokes are you joking? Can the matter of rushing to answer among the masters be called robbing? Anyway, it did not violate the Hogwarts school rules. www.ndlenovel.com. It is estimated that when the founding Big Four of Hogwarts formulated the school rules, they did not expect anyone to love learning so much. Yvonne felt that even if they knew, they would definitely leave tears of comfort in the coffin. Hermione was dumbfounded by Yvonne, especially since Yvonne used his previous experience of being deducted 5 points in flight lessons. Now out of guilt, he wants to make up for it 10 times 100 times. There is nothing to say. While Yvonne was happy, the professors of various subjects had headaches. More importantly, they didn't know how to deal with Yvonne. They have seen little wizards making trouble, but it was the first time that they rushed to answer in class. In addition, Yvonne was correct and accurate every time he answered, and he admitted his mistakes sincerely after answering, which caused professors of various subjects to be embarrassed to scold Yvonne just a few words. Yvonne, who had tasted the sweetness, then extended his deadly claws to the last Fortress Potions class, intending to gradually figure out Professor Snape's bottom line. Snape, who had always favored Slytherin and was hostile to Gryffindor, was not so good at talking. He personally gave Yvonne a warning when get out of class was over. If he saw Yvonne next time, he would stand up and answer questions without consent. He deducted all the academy points Yvonne earned in Beak. But as soon as Snape walked with his forefoot, the system prompt sounded as expected. Ding, the potions course is over. This comprehensive class evaluation, satisfactory, excellent. Evaluator, Severus Snape. Reward, academic points *10. Dead Sundara. Yvonne couldn't help but spit out, and then touched his chin thoughtfully. He seemed, probably, like, you can still skin a little bit more? Chapter 24, Horrible Troll. Of course, this kind of thought only flashed in Ivan's mind. If he died again, Snape might still deduct a lot of Gryffindor's college points. Yvonne doesn't care about this, but he won't cause the entire Gryffindor Academy to suffer a loss for earning grade points. So in the next few days, when Yvonne was in the potions class, apart from engaging in small moves in private and collecting some materials needed to make hypnotic potions, there were no major moves. This kind of preparation work lasted until Halloween before it was over. Yvonne looked at the system bar and was still very satisfied with his results. Yvonne Halls. Occupation, Wizard. Curses, Fear Curse Level 2, 265/400, Levitating Curse Level 2, 97/400, Transformation Curse Level 2, 382/400, Split Curse Level 2, 84/400, Petrification Curse, 191/400, Shrinking Curse 1 Level, 74/200. The rest is omitted. Knowledge Theory, Magic Item Making Level 0, 435/500, Potions Level 3, 1/800, Basic Magic Principles Level 2, 218/400. Magic Item, Magic Wand, Yew Wood, Unicorn Hair, 11 inches and 3/4 long. Magic, Medium. Fit, 72.5%. Academic Points, 107. After nearly half a semester of hard work, in addition to the newly learned reduction spell, Ivan has upgraded all the spells he knows to the second level. Both the power and the stability have improved greatly compared to the first level. Cut. Among them, the knowledge of potions was the first to reach the level 3, and the only thing that remained unchanged was the production of magic items, and Ivan had no clue for the time being. The grade point is also left enough for one experience card, just in case. In order to welcome the upcoming Halloween, pumpkin lanterns have been hung in the Hall of Hogwarts, which contains magic released by Dumbledore himself, which can continuously emit a faint blue light. Pippi hides insidiously in one of the lanterns. Whenever an unsuspecting little wizard passes by, Pippi will suddenly pop out of the lantern and startle him, and then scold him at the little wizard's curse. Among them laughed and got into another lantern. But I have to say that it is precisely because of Pippi ghosts that this Halloween has a more horrible atmosphere. At the very least, Harry and Ron felt the festive atmosphere brought by Pippi ghost. As long as they saw a pumpkin lantern glowing in the castle, they would subconsciously hide away. Ivan, what do you do to make so many thorns? The big exhibition hall, the long table in Gryffindor, Harry looked strangely as Ivan turned the wooden branches he had picked up from unknown sources into half-circular spikes. These semicircular iron thorns are very ugly, but the spikes on them are thin and long, and the faintly gleaming cold light made Harry shiver. Of course it's Halloween for everyone to have some fun. Ivan said with a smile. Have fun. Harry and Ron glanced at each other, always having a bad feeling. Just kidding, just practice the spell. Ivan waved his hand and explained. But the movement of Ivan's hand did not stop. He waved his magic wand and pointed it on the newly deformed spike. After using the shrinking spell to reduce the spike several times, he threw it into the bag. There was a sound of metal clashing in the bag, and Ivan backhanded it away. By the way, where's Hermione? Ivan looked left and right, but didn't see Miss Know-It-all, which was a little strange. Well, this. Ron's face was slightly red, and he stubbed out a few words for a long time. Harry, who couldn't stand it in the end, told him what Hermione had heard when Ron secretly said bad things today. I made no mistake, she was like that. Ron flushed. Ivan frowned, but he didn't expect that this thing happened. After thinking about it, Ivan stood up, picked up the wand, and walked towards the exit of the hall. Ivan, the party hasn't started yet, where are you going? Harry asked. Of course I went to Hermione. Ivan replied, leaving only Harry and Ron behind. Leaving the lively exhibition hall, Ivan found a secret path and went to the abandoned girls' bathroom as quickly as possible, intending to persuade Hermione to leave first, so as not to disturb his actions against the trolls later. But halfway through, Ivan changed the plan again after careful consideration, because Ivan was a little confused about how long it would take to persuade Hermione, and did not know when the troll was released. If it happened to be himself when she and Hermione were in the bathroom, they were blocked by trolls, let alone fighting, it's hard to escape. In contrast, it is better to solve the trolls directly at a place a little further away from the bathroom. Because of the stepping point in advance, Ivan quickly found a suitable corridor and threw a few pieces of rock cakes that Hagrid had given before to the center of the corridor. These rock cakes are all soaked powerful sleeping potions, and the dose is enough to put several adult wizards. UU reading www.ukansha.com. As for why is rock cake? Ivan said that anyway, giant monsters are not picky eaters, they can eat everything, and rock cakes are carried, and they are used as waste, or else they are put in the bedroom waiting for insects. Since Hagrid, the half-giant, likes eating so much, maybe the giant is good at it. After making enough preparations, Ivan hid in the corner of the corridor and was able to defeat the trolls in the simplest way. Ivan would hold the magic wand hard when he was full. There is only one life, when it should be shrugged, if it should be shrugged. Less than a minute after Ivan was ready, there was a slight vibration on the floor. Ivan faintly smelled a foul smell, and his expression suddenly shuddered. The nervousness was extreme. The monster has arrived. The next moment, a giant 12 feet tall appeared on the other side of the corridor. The first thing Ivan saw was a thick sole with Paizian Bay, and the giant monster's fat waist was like a huge bucket made of a dilapidated old tree, with an ugly green paint painted on it, with a small head on the top. It looks a little bigger than Ivan's at best, and with his burly body, it looks a little absurd. The most important thing about is that it is still holding a thick wooden stick in its hand, and it drags it on the floor for a long time and makes sharp and piercing noises. Ivan swallowed hard. Only then did I understand why Dumbledore chose the troll as one of the barriers to defend the Sorcerer's Stone. The huge body alone was enough to make an adult wizard treat it with caution. For a little wizard who has not graduated from the Wizarding Academy, it is even more a nightmare. Ivan can't help but feel fortunate that he didn't directly choose to be tough. If he accidentally gets drawn by the giant stick of the troll, he might have to cross once. Chapter 25, Battle against the Trolls and the Ineffective Horror Curse. Yugatum Leviosa. Seeing the giant monster slowly approaching, Ivan whispered the levitating spell, and several rock cakes on the ground slowly floated up, so that the giant monster could see directly, instead of being too small to see it. Ching directly stepped on it. But at this time, Ivan was still a little worried, for fear that the monster was not as stupid as the book said, and he saw that this was a trap. Fortunately, Ivan soon discovered that the giant monster was stupid than he thought. He didn't even have the vigilance that ordinary creatures should have. It didn't matter how the food in front of him came from, he grabbed it and sent it into his mouth. Even for the purpose of grabbing, the troll dropped the stick he was holding on the ground. It looked like a foodie. Ivan couldn't help wondering whether Chino had secretly deducted the troll's food and then saved the money. Kanan put it in his pocket. After spitting out in his heart for a while, Ivan's original nervous expression also loosened, and his left hand gently touched the pocket of the wizard's robe. His carefully prepared escape method seemed to be useless. However, what Ivan didn't expect was that after a few minutes, the monster after eating the rock cake didn't mean to fall, but twitched his nose, as if he wanted to hear if there was any other food. Ivan was a little dazed. You must know that in order to ensure the success of the plan, it would be okay for him to use the amount to knock down several adult wizards, but the troll did not even react. It's not scientific at all. Bah! It's not magic at all. Could it be that the potion he made is more watery? Ivan looked at the potions that he had reached level 3, somewhat uncertain. Ah! When Ivan was entangled whether he should do it directly, a loud voice directly broke the already bad situation. Ivan hiding in the secret tunnel saw Hermione who suddenly appeared at the corner of the corridor. The troll directly picked up the wooden stick on the ground and walked towards Hermione with excitement. Ivan understood the moment he saw the troll move. Hermione should have been attracted by the sound of the wooden stick just now. Ivan cursed secretly in his heart. If he had known it, he would have set the trap farther away. Of course, Ivan is only talking about it. If he really wants to go a little further, he can't be sure whether the troll will pass by there. On the other side, Hermione was panicked for a while in the face of the terrifying pressure caused by the approach of the giant monster. The brain kept transmitting the information of escape to the body, but her legs were soft and even barely able to stand. Just as Ivan thought, Hermione, who was crying in the bathroom originally, felt the vibration from the ground and the loud noise made by the wooden stick before she came to take a look curiously. It's just that Hermione never thought that she would see a terrifying creature like a troll in the hallway of Hogwarts. Just as Hermione thought she was going to die here tragically, a voice rang in due course. Fear is coming. The bright purple light was shot from the other side. The huge size of the troll made the spell almost impossible to miss. The moment the terror curse hit, the troll stopped running forward, dumbfounded. Standing still there, Ivan, who had been hiding in the secret path, came out at the same time. Ivan. Hermione, like a drowning man, grabbed a life-saving straw, rushed up and hugged Ivan with tears that had never dried up. SHHH. Ivan did not relax his vigilance, using his free left hand to break free of Hermione's restraint, holding a wand in his right hand, constantly increasing the power of the fear curse. Hermione blushed, but quickly noticed something wrong with the troll under Ivan's reminder. Hermione thought that Ivan used a spell to subdue the troll, but now it doesn't seem to be that simple. What's wrong with it? Hermione asked quietly. Ivan did not answer, but just signaled Hermione to stop speaking, but his eyes never left the troll. This was the first time Ivan saw this situation since using the fear curse. In order to cause enough fear to the trolls, Ivan used the fear spell to reenact the three-headed Norwegian dog that he encountered before. After zooming in, he replaced it in Hermione's position. And the giant monster that was under the fear curse was also very confused at this time. How did the little dwarf who was wearing strange clothes in front of him somehow become a huge three-headed dog? And the image is faintly familiar, but it seems to be in the impression of it. Compared with a lot of fat, is it because you have secretly added a meal recently? Now how to do? Hermione said nothing this time, but still motioned with her eyes. Ivan pondered for a while, but still reluctant to give up this opportunity. Time is limited and the professor may arrive at any time. If you miss this opportunity, next time you want to defeat the trolls, you can only go under the trapdoor guarded by the three-headed dog Norway. Thinking of this, Yvonne lip and motion gestured Hermione to use the levitation charm to capture the troll's stick, and then smash it on the head. That's right, it's the way Harry and Ron defeated the troll in the original book. Even if they were unsuccessful, they would at least be able to seize the troll's weapon. www.mdlenovel.com. Hermione expressed doubts about Ivan's crazy plans. But out of trust, I was still prepared to implement it. However, it is the stick that the troll swings faster than Hermione casts the spell. The giant monster, who had no brains, after many attempts to communicate to no avail, finally chose to shoot angrily. The weird force in the wooden stick that was thicker than the adult waist made Yvonne feel the threat of death after a long absence. At the very moment when Yvonne used his last hole card, the remaining academic points in the system bar instantly dropped to single digits. In the next moment, Ivan's thinking speed was increased by 100-fold. The landing point of the stick and the possible follow-up actions of the trolls passed through Ivan's mind one by one, and then he turned and rushed, holding Hermione and rolling on the ground a few times in embarrassment. Behind him, a huge sound came at the same time. The original solid corner had been knocked out by the monster, and the powder debris it had brought up was spread all over the floor. The fear curse that Yvonne used before was also broken. This time, even if the troll was stupid, he knew he was being teased. He raised the stick and was ready to pursue it, but the troll felt his brain suddenly fainted after 2 steps. Dull and staggered, he hit the wall, but the powerful sleeping potion he had eaten before finally began to work. Taking advantage of the gap in the troll's brain not awake, Yvonne suddenly climbed up from the ground, pulling Hermione and the troll to a distance of more than 10 meters. The affected troll also regained its sanity at this time, apparently for sleeping pills. The resistance of the agent is very high. Although the troll didn't know why he was suddenly trapped, the 2 little dwarfs on the ground could not be wrong, and immediately rushed towards the 2 in anger. A dozen meters is not too far for the giant monster, just a few seconds can be crossed, it is enough for Yvonne.